Well, good morning, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Welcome to the council work session of February 27th. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss potential amendments to the city's land development code. This is part of a ongoing process that we began, I don't know, a year and a half ago maybe, to look at sections of our land development code that may be in need of revision or updating in light of the circumstances of today and so forth. So, council members, anything before we start? City manager, anything? Okay, so it doesn't say so on here, but I assume we're turning it over to Mr. Pauly?
Only briefly, sir.
Only briefly. Well, I hope it's long enough to tell us what to talk about. So, Mr. Pauly.
Thank you, sir. Good morning once again, everyone. Greg Pauly, your Community Development Director. This morning, I have just a couple of brief slides. My goal this morning is... Yes, I'm sorry. Is it not close enough? Is that better? Thank you. My goal this morning is to hopefully spark some creative and, in some cases, innovative conversation with regards to our current land development code and to seek guidance from this council with regards to what each of you may want us to focus on. If we could bring up the slides, please. Some things that have changed since the last LDC workshop. Obviously, there's a new director in the chair, and not having worked with the former director closely on these topics, I simply want to make sure that the focus of today is exactly where it should be. Obviously, we've lost a council member from the previous sitting council. Meredith Abel is no longer with us, and Mr. Kravitz has joined the council. And lastly, most recently, as you all recall, we did update the fence walls and hedges ordinance, section 12861, which also included updates to non-conforming properties as well as the definition section. So again, during today's workshop, staff, I've got my staff with me here today. I do apologize. Our city planner is in Tallahassee on a pre-scheduled working seminar conference, and she could not be here today. But we did spend a great bit of time discussing this workshop as well as some of the other previously discussed LDC updates. So we do seek to acquire guidance from this council with regards to what you would like to see us focus on. Staff further seeks to reaffirm and or in some cases clarify earlier guidance that may have been discussed at the last LDC workshop last year or even the previous one before that, the prior year. This guidance and feedback that we collect today, again, staff is going to be taking vigorous notes and references as to today's discussion. We hope to use this guidance to assist staff in aligning priorities, to help keep the target in focus, and to establish benchmarks to ensure future proposed updates support your direction. And with that, as I mentioned in my opening, my slides for this section, I do have others to speak about maybe towards the end of the meeting. But for this section, I would like to clear the slate, hence the blank slide on the screen, and open it up to the council. And if you would please, I welcome any new ideas that you would like to see us focus on, or if you wish to revisit some of the previous amendments that were discussed, I also have some backup material on those as well.
Mr. Pauly, it might be beneficial if you could, it's been some time since we met to discuss this. Can you remind us of the direction we gave? I'm just going from memory. I know we had discussion on auxiliary dwelling units. We had discussion on side yard pools and sheds. I think it might be helpful to bring back up what we've previously talked so we are consistent and we don't start clearing a whole different forest here.
Very good, sir. Thank you. If we could go back to the slides, please. You had mentioned accessory dwelling units. We did spend time speaking on accessory dwelling units, ADUs, at the previous council workshop on LDC. It was discussed at that time that ADUs are included within our city's comprehensive plan, supported by future land use categories R4 and R9. Some of the features that ADUs bring with them is affordable multifamily, multi-generational family member housing, both for elderly family members as well as young adults that are transitioning maybe through the college years. Also, on-site housing for caregivers. They do provide opportunities for affordable rentals, depending on how the council feels about different types of rentals. That would also include our short-term rentals that that we would want to take into consideration as far as that is concerned. And finally, there is a revenue stream there available to the property owner. Specifically discussed, before I get into that, I did mention to the city attorney there is a new update circulating with regards to some legislation addressing LDUs. And in just a moment, I would like to defer to the city attorney because I did ask her to provide you an update on that new legislation. It's pending at this point. I'm not sure exactly where it's at in the...
Could we just go through all the previous things and then we'll go through one at a time?
Sure, absolutely. So LDUs, accessory structures, that would include your sheds, your pools, your pool enclosures, other big structures, commercial vehicles and residential driveways. We have discussed an interest in microbreweries, and forgive me, I meant to include micro wineries in this category as well. For purposes of today's discussion, we can maybe speak synonymously about both types of facilities. There was some discussion on signs. There's businesses in our community that often seek to install signs in excess of what the code currently requires. And some folks within the community have expressed interest in amending that portion of our code to allow for additional signage. I'm not sure if shed permit requirements were discussed at the last one or not. That's one that I think has come up since the last one. And then tree mitigation is in the works. It's actually something that's currently in progress. I know Mr. Mueller, I believe, is behind me. Mr. Mueller has been working closely with Mr. Ferris on updating some standards within the tree mitigation. There's 2 or 3 areas in there that are more housekeeping type updates. One would be making sure that our approved list of trees conforms to what the state now recommends. And then there's a void within a portion of that code that needs to be tightened up a little bit with regards to mitigation. I believe that's the sum and substance of what was previously discussed.
Why don't we skip skip over ADUs at the beginning and move through some of the others? The ADUs is likely to be one of the more lengthy conversations, and perhaps it might be beneficial to go through some of these that aren't as, I mean, we had previous discussions about accessory structures inside yards, pools and sheds and stuff. I can't speak for council yet, but I just am not sensing that there's been a lot of change in our thoughts on that since the last time. Commercial vehicles, the same thing. We had a lot of discussion about that, and I don't imagine that's changed a whole lot. The signs and shed permits, I think we could probably go through all of these pretty quickly, I think. And then when we get to the ADUs, there may be more robust discussion about that. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Is that okay, Gil? Yeah. Okay, where do you want to start? Accessory structures, sheds, pools, and side yards, backyards?
For me, it's shed permits right now.
Shed permits?
I have a question about
Yeah.
this. So Accessory dwelling units, obviously I know what that's describing. Accessory structure, how would that be different from a shed if it's not
It
the
is a shed,
dwelling?
ma'am.
Okay, so we have it listed twice. I mean, that's all I'm asking to
Well,
get
there-
started.
It's a location.
I mean,
Yeah, the first comment there under accessory structures is for your sheds, your pools, your pool enclosures, location allowed with on the property. And the second comment there that you see in the right column talks about permits,
So
specifically for sheds.
if we can talk about that, because I can tell you what comes up at code with shed permits.
All right.
If
that's okay.
if that's all right to lead that off. And I'm not willing to change it. So if someone buys a pre-assembled shed from Ted Sheds or something like that, and it's under the square footage that we allow, I think it's 100 square feet?
150, sir.
150, okay. They can hire a company, have it brought in and put in and anchored down, and they don't need a permit.
Okay.
If you buy the same size shed from Home Depot that you assemble yourself, that's an assembled shed, that's like building one from scratch, that requires a permit. And that's what's catching some people. And I know we do the permit, and then for that shed, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you buy it, let's say from Home Depot, I'm just picking on Home Depot, but you buy it and it probably comes with all the documentation that when assembled correctly, it meets all the wind loads and all that. You take that into community development. You do have to get a permit for it, correct?
Yes.
And then they assemble it, and is it inspected? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so it's much harder work to get that shed. I think that's very valid still in that, but just our residents don't know that. So they go buy it, they assemble it, someone sees it, then it gets red tagged. And I don't know how to correct that, but that seems to be coming up a lot in code.
So, Mr. Behe?
Yeah.
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So what Councilmember Chambers' his narrative is exactly what's happening. I can tell you from our perspective, administration's perspective, we would recommend that we get rid of that permit requirement and we just keep, if it's a 150-foot shed or smaller, correct me if I'm wrong, then you don't need a permit. It is very confusing, and it creates nothing but angst. And I personally, as the manager, I don't really see a whole lot of benefit to this requirement because we're sending a lot of this miscommunication all the time about it. So I would prefer that if the council's amenable, that we just say across the board, 150 square foot or less. Doesn't matter if you assemble it on site or you bring it in from the outside, you don't need a permit.
Or if you build it yourself, you design and build it yourself?
My research on this, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to advance the slide to Hillsborough County's requirement. I'll go back to the previous slide in just a moment because that's Temple Terrace requirement. If we look specifically at Hillsborough County's requirement, all sheds, regardless of whether they are pre-assembled and delivered fully assembled, or whether they're a kit of a series of components, or whether they're built from scratch up, all sheds within Hillsborough County, 100 square feet or less, there is no permit required. Now, that does not mean that there's not standards that they have to meet. Their code is flush with standards that still have to be adhered to, but there's no permitting on the front side.
So there's no, there's standards, but there's nobody checking to see if they met those standards.
Not on the front side, sir,
Yeah,
no.
There's no inspection because there's no permit.
That's
so-
correct. And on the flip side of that same coin, once you exceed 150 square feet, regardless of the construction, the assembly, or the pre-delivery, pre-assembled, anything in excess of 150 square feet does require a permit.
Regardless.
It does not matter. So theirs is it's a leaner code in its content. They do not impose different regulation standards with regards to pre-builts versus kit assembly versus scratch-up construction.
What about Tampa?
I don't know if I have Tampa in here right now, sir. Let me just double check. No, I don't. Do we have? You want to speak to it?
Let me just review this real quick.
We've looked at it in comparison. We've leaned very heavily on Hillsborough County.
Microphone.
Microphone.
I'm sorry. While she's researching. We're going to play this game because there's only one microphone hookup over here.
Sorry.
We've leaned heavily on research through Hillsborough County. We've also looked at City of Tampa in some cases, and again, Mrs. Robinson is reviewing it right now, and we'll have something for you here shortly. But we've also looked at Plant City in certain cases, and we've looked across the bay. We've looked at communities such as Clearwater. I think one of our examples that we're going to be able to discuss when we start talking about microbreweries was the Gulfport region in that community. So we do have some other anecdotal references to discuss. But as far as this one, the only thing I included in the slides was Hillsborough, and I think she's got it.
This is just accessory structures. It doesn't specify. This is just in reference to accessory structures, and it doesn't specify sheds. So I'm not seeing a square footage requirement.
I vaguely remember it, sir. I don't have the reference. I'm believing I didn't include the reference because it was somewhat more entailed. And I think when we went through this, we were looking to streamline that. But we can come back to it. She's going to pull it up with their code now.
In the meantime, if I might, for ease for everybody, from the legal department's standpoint, there should be permits for all sheds. And it should not matter whether you're putting it together yourself or if it's coming fully assembled. The point is to make sure that it is not placed within a setback, because without getting a permit, most people don't know where their shed is supposed to go. They shove it way in the back corner, so it ends up closer to the neighbor than it does to their house. And so if they do get a permit, they'll find out where they need to place the shed. They'll also find out how they need to attach the shed so that it doesn't become a projectile in a windstorm. It should be, many of them should be attached to a concrete pad, and they'll find out that they need to have that instead of just plopping it down on the ground. So our recommendation is to avoid anyone ending up in front of the code board due to their shed, that they should come in and get a permit.
So now we have city manager telling us one thing and the city attorney telling us something different.
So can I don't know if we trust generative AI or not, but generative AI tells me that City of Tampa is 120 square feet or less.
That's exactly what we just found.
So if it's 120 square feet or less, they don't require a permit. I appreciate, can I speak to the city attorney's thing? Not to disagree with the attorney. I think we're just looking at it from different viewpoints here. I'm looking at it from the viewpoint of the experience that the customers have with us. And we are trying our best. Our goal has always been to streamline our process to make it easier for the customers. And the disparity that we have today, where we say it's 150 or less, you don't need a permit, which is what is sort of forward-facing, so that's common. And then people say, okay, great, and they assemble it on site, then they get brought to the code board because that's not correct. You should have done it, this other way. That is what we're trying to get at. And if you look at, again, if this is correct, City of Tampa is 120 or less, they don't need a permit. The county doesn't require a permit for 150 or less. We would not be doing anything that far different from our neighboring communities. And the issue that we have is that we're a small city in a region, and the contractors aren't just Temple Terrace contractors, and businesses aren't Temple Terrace businesses. So they all talk to each other, and they assume there's this assumption that, more or less the regulations are similar, and when they get here, that trips people up also. So we are trying. Now, if the council wants us to obviously take a different path, which would be more in line with what the city attorney wants to do, that's fine. We will adjust. But that is not the direction we were trying to operate on. We were trying to make things more streamlined.
Okay. Council, I will think it's significant to point out that we just went through 2 hurricanes. And I've heard about trees and roofs and you name it. And I don't think we've had a single case of somebody call me and said my neighbor's shed blew into my house. Or, I mean, it might have happened, but I don't think sheds have come up at all. And we just got the worst hurricane Temple Terrace has probably ever had in a generation. So go ahead.
Anecdotally, my daughter is putting a shed in. She went to a place and they said, "Well, where do you live?" Temple Terrace. And the collector was, "Ugh." Okay.
Well, that's what we're trying to fix.
Exactly what I'm saying. You know,
Yeah.
we need, you know, we need to be sensitive to the windstorm issues, and but you know, we're trying to make it a little bit easier to do business within the city. I think, at least as far as this issue is concerned, I kind of like the streamlined impact or the streamlined effect of the county. 150 less, good. 150 more. You need it irrespective of what the source and the construction. And I kind of like keep it simple.
I agree. I think consistency where we can and where it makes sense to be consistent with neighboring jurisdictions makes more sense than making ours more complicated. And so I'm in agreement with being consistent with the Hillsborough County regulation.
Yeah, same for me. Obviously, it comes up a lot of code, but I also agree with Ms. Shoshone that we need to have some really strong guidelines and how, I know it's on the website now, what to do, but maybe handouts or whatever when someone calls in and says, I want to put a shed, what do I do? To make sure that the setbacks are, because that's the other issue that shows up at code a lot is that sheds are at the fence line.
Well, and that's one of the other bullets. It's really, yeah.
But streamline the permit process for sheds, I'm all for it. That.
Yeah, Ms. Shoshone's point is valid. By eliminating permits, there's almost certainly going to be an increase in sheds that are placed in the wrong place.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I mean, the rest of the world seems to be functioning okay without that. I agree with you that we should streamline this. That was the whole point in this to begin with. And so, I mean, you could apply this argument to everything. You need to have a permit to wash your car to make sure you're doing it on the lawn instead of, you know, I mean, where do you draw the line on that? So,
If I may, the information regarding setbacks and so forth, how readily available is that to you know, the average individual? I want to put a shed in.
I can answer some of that. If you go to the website and click on sheds or do a word search for sheds or something, it comes up all your setbacks and everything, what's required.
So it is on our website.
It's on the website.
Okay, all right. That's what I want to make
And
sure.
it's its own bullet point, I think.
If I may add to that, Councilmember Chambers, there's been some other events recently that have sparked additional conversation between Mr. Bahia and myself regarding building up those quick reference resources that you alluded to. So that is something that we are certainly working on. I believe you also, sir, Mr. Shishler, mentioned, or at least have in the past mentioned, I don't like using the word cheat sheet because it's not really cheating, but it's an informational page of something that is quick, easy to understand, and readily available through not only our website, but also available to our team downstairs when people walk in. A lot of times people will just walk in and ask questions because they know they want to do X, Y, Z, but they want to make sure they're doing X, Y, Z according to what the code allows. So that is a project that, in fact, next week it's on the work schedule for someone very near and dear to me right now to start working on. So you will absolutely see that project coming forward also. And this topic of conversation will be certainly included in that project.
okay. So it sounds to me like we have consensus on
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
I have some generic things that I'd like to ask about before we get very detailed on the specific land development. Can we do that?
So is it such, are we able to close the door on this?
Yes. Yes.
And then I'll go to you. And,
Yes.
Okay, right.
Yep.
You had something.
No, I'm good.
Okay, so we're going to close the door on this, and then we'll go to you because you wanted to introduce some other things. So,
Yes.
okay, we have consensus on the shed things. We'd like to be consistent with Hillsborough County. And I think that would make life easier for our residents, for shed contractors, for our code enforcement staff, for our building inspector. I mean, it's going to make life easier for people. And then the code board and everybody can direct their energies to something that might be more beneficial to the city as opposed to shed complaints. So,
One personal to
Yeah.
that. With the increased, if you will, or maybe not be the right word, but the visibility of the requirements, the cheat sheet. We make a concerted effort to putting that information out for the public so that it's right there. It's easy to find. Sometimes our website can be a little cumbersome, and if the easier it is for the citizenry to find it, the better off we'll be in the long run.
Yes, sir. And that's a great point. Along those same lines, staff met with our new marketing director earlier this week to address that exact
Perfect. Good.
concern.
okay. Councilmember Fernandez.
Okay, so I have I have 3 items, but 2 that are basically the overriding. And one is consistency within the city staff, and then consistency with area jurisdictions. So one of the things that I hear often is that when people come in to do a project and they are trying to go through the permit process, they hear something different from whichever staff member they talk to. Then they come back and they hear a different answer from a different staff person. And this does go along the lines, and I think you're starting to address this with creating the sheets for very common projects. But I just want to make sure that when we are putting together our land development and our permitting guidelines and all of that, that we're keeping in mind how we're going to create the documentation so that staff gives people the same answer no matter which staff person it is, and also that maybe there's a place on the website that is a button that says, want to build something. And when you click on it, it gives you a list of the most common projects, and then that sheet might come up, which I guess I would call Cliff Notes versus
so
cheat sheets.
I
So that's
added-
one. And then the second is consistency with area jurisdictions. And I'm not saying that Temple Terrace should be the same as every jurisdiction. But the other comment I get very commonly is that Temple Terrace is impossible to do business with. And when you ask, when I call staff and I say, okay, we're requiring this, the contractor says Hillsborough County never does this, Tampa never does this, but you find out that those jurisdictions do require something similar, but maybe it's not as well enforced. It would just be nice to also be able to reference that easily when somebody is coming in to say, well, my contractor said this jurisdiction doesn't require anything. Why are we so difficult? We might be able to say, well, in fact, they do require this. I don't know why that contractor might think they don't, just something to make us a little less. I just want to do something that helps alleviate people thinking that we're so burdensome when we're not necessarily burdensome, but also try to clean up like what we're talking about today.
Okay, so I put
that's
those
it.
2 things on the agenda, like new business, but I think we should dispose of the carryover old business before we embark on new stuff. But I did I wrote those 2 things down. I'll come back to you for that discussion. But let's dispose of the carryover stuff so we don't run out of time. And then they're like, well, we didn't even get the direction we needed on it. So, but I'd made notes there, and I will come back to you.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So since we just talked about sheds and the permits of sheds, it might be best to go into now the accessory structures to talk about where sheds could go, the pools and where they could go? That makes sense to go right to that?
Absolutely, sir. I
Okay.
do have here, thank you very much, Mary. I have one slide. This will probably look somewhat familiar, although I have added a bit of color to the image, and I've tried to clearly define the side yards versus the rear yards. As you may recall, there was confusion in past interpretations based on the side yard and even the corner yard. For purposes of today's discussion, corner yards are kind of their own little creature because they're actually technically could be considered fronting the other roadway. So there's going to be setbacks that we have to look at for corner yards that might be a bit different than some of the other setbacks. With regard to the current definition that was recently updated, you see now the rear yard is clearly defined as a side-to-side full-use space, of course, minus required setbacks, for the placement of sheds, accessory structures, swimming pools, pool enclosures, things of that nature. So from a staff position, we would simply like to engage council on discussion as to are you in support of the current standard to allow for these structures to be placed only within the rear yard, pending, of course, a variance? Or are you of the mindset that you would like to discuss side yards?
Pending a variance of what?
If we have had situations where people have petitioned the Board of Adjustment for a variance to allow swimming pools in a side yard, to allow other structures to be placed in a side yard.
Okay, but in the rear yard,
In the rear yard, no such.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I may have misled you on that. I'm referring, the variance, of course, that addresses the side yard.
yes, city manager.
So I think one thing, and this is a great slide, thank you, Mr. Polly, but I think the issues we have sometimes when it comes up with pools, for example, in side yards, if you look at this illustration, you would think, why would you need to? And this is not a good illustration for that. It's usually when people have this odd lot where the rear yard is constrained and maybe very narrow, for example, but the side yard could be in fact wider than the rear yard. Those are times when we see people ask for that. Now, that the argument could be made then, okay, they can get relief from the Board of Adjustment because it's a hardship on the lot. See, I'm not sure if you, in this discussion, you want to consider, we haven't talked about this, but maybe some sort of a ratio in terms of the width of the side yard relative to the rear yard. If it triggers that, maybe that's when it's allowed. Just an idea. I just didn't want this slide to be sort of misleading in terms of the discussion.
It seems to me like last year when we had this discussion, that's what we were talking about, was if there's a certain amount of feet on the side yard, or if there's a certain if there's, I really don't like the idea of relying on the Board of Adjustment, because the legal threshold there is, you have a hardship, but you can't create your own hardship, and they could say, well, you built your house in the wrong place. If you'd have built it here, you wouldn't, so that's a little unfair to put that burden on citizens of the Board of Adjustment. I mean, if that's our intent, we should probably address it in code. But yeah, I was thinking last year in our discussion that's exactly what we did. We talked about if certain circumstances exist, you could have a pool or an enclosure. And I think we had a home, if I remember right, there was a home that we had used as an example where they had I don't know if it was a swimming pool or an in-the-ground hot tub or an enclosure around it that went off the side of the house instead of the backyard. And I think it was used as an example of there's no reason this couldn't be, why has this got to be a violation? This looks fine. But it would have to be a certain distance from the property line so that it's not right next to the neighbor's bedroom,
Just the same criteria as in the backyard,
Same
has to be a
criteria.
certain.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
question of staff, is there a requirement for access through the side yards that it has to be so many clear feet?
Yes. Yes, there is. I believe, where'd he go? There he is. Is it 3 feet, 5 feet?
Water range is 3 feet across from the structure.
3 feet.
You have to have at least 5-foot walkway.
Okay.
Clear pathway on this wall.
Okay, so if we,
Can you repeat that into
Yes,
the
it is again.
microphone
I've
so
lost it.
people can?
Yes, the sum and substance is the 5 foot is that safe number for clear passage around the sides.
okay, so we could do something that includes side yards with the back rear yard pursuant to all the setback guidelines and those guidelines. We could do something like that.
If that's the council's wish.
Yeah, we could do something like that, so all the setbacks are already in place and the rules about, you wouldn't want a pool, so somebody accessing the backyard has to tread water to get all the way to the back, so.
No, exactly. And if you would like for us to carry away from this meeting research with regards to, I think you mentioned percentages or ratios to accommodate sufficient property to house these different accessory structures, we can certainly dig deeper into
I'm
that.
not sure if a ratio would work though, because I mean, you'd have to play with that. I don't want to get that deep here, but it could be that the reason they want to do the side yard is because something in the backyard precludes them from using that. And so I don't know if a ratio would work or if it would be better to just do a certain distance or whatever, but I think it's important that we maintain, like Dallas was saying though, that clear access around, and I'm thinking of things like firefighting. You need to be able to get around to the back of the structure clearly. Law enforcement, there's times when any emergency, you would need to be able to get back there. So we wouldn't want that being, so I think part of the guidance would be don't encroach on that.
So,
5 foot the dotted line, I'm sorry. Is
I
the
was
5
gonna-
foot the dotted line?
Huh?
Is the 5 foot the dotted line over here?
Actual property line.
That's the actual property, okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure we're understanding.
No, for this diagram, the 5 foot's not represented.
No, I understand that, but I mean, it would be the actual property line, not the building, not the building itself.
Well, a setback is from the property line.
I'm talking specific,
Access requirements would not necessarily have a hard line. It would just provide for an open space of 5 feet or greater.
between the end of the structure and the property line. Okay, that's fine.
okay, so an example, so if I wanted to put a shed in my side yard, I would need 5 feet from the wall of the shed to the fence line or the property line. That's our minimum setback. If it's a small shed, let's say 10 by 10. And then 5 feet from the front yard setback.
There would not be a front yard set.
So I could put it right to that. Okay, but then how much between the shed and the house? 5 feet or 3 feet?
3 feet. 3 feet between.
Yeah, okay, so it's okay. I'm seeing a nod yes and a nod no back behind you, but that's okay.
You have to have a 5 foot clear water, so you have to have a 5 foot. Water's edge is going to this street. He's talking about from house.
I'm talking about.
The main structure.
Alice, can you come up to the microphone?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get an example. So I would need a 20-foot wide side yard to be able to do what I want to do.
Hi, Malik Hall speaking, planner for community
Is that
development.
microphone on?
Oh, is there?
Yes.
Yes, it's on. Cool. From principal structure to accessory structure is a 3 foot setback. So in between a shed or,
A pool.
yeah, if you're going to have a detached. If it's a detached accessory structure, there's a 3 foot minimum from principal to accessory. And then you have the 5 foot minimum, as we spoke, for accessory structures from property line to accessory structure.
Okay, so if I wanted to do that, I'd have to have an 18-foot wide side yard. Just checking.
You would have to have at least 5 feet for the property line of the structure and then 3 feet from the
And then a
structure to
10-foot
principal.
shed.
So
Yeah. So we could do something very easy on it. If we wanted to pursue the side yard, it would have to meet all those setbacks. And then, of course, then that throws in the how many square feet of property of impervious surface, and all those requirements are already here.
So Malik, before you step down, can you give your name and title on the record so we can preserve the record?
yes, sir. Malik Hall, planner for community development.
Thank you. Okay, so The only thing to keep in mind, that works for sheds, but we're gonna have to let them work their magic because pools and hot tubs and patios where you've got a group of people out there, that might not be enough distance but to the neighbor's
Sure,
house.
but
So-
right, and I guess what they need from us is a desire to allow stuff in the side yard, otherwise we're good.
With,
That is exactly-
with the appropriate setbacks,
Yeah,
and
but I
that would
mean-
be different, in my mind anyway.
Yeah.
A shed's one thing, a screen patio with a pool and, or a potential gathering spot where you've got a little bar there, and I mean, that's a little different if your neighbor's bedroom's right there, so 5 feet from that to the fence might not be enough.
No, I mean, if you have a pool enclosure and it's 10 feet high, that throws a different setback in.
Yeah.
From the side yard.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I know.
Well, no, I want to say that I am in agreement with creating this because Templeton, we're not a cookie cutter community. We have, our lots are so many different shapes and sizes. And to send somebody to the variance board when in a lot of cases, it's not even how, they may be buying a house that was built in the 60s. It's not even that it could have been built on the lot differently. It's just the lot is so uniquely shaped. So I don't want to create a situation where 50% of our households have to go before a variance board in order to use their property the way they would like. So I am completely in agreement with creating a set of specifications that would allow somebody to use what we would traditionally consider a side yard, but for these purposes might work, with the parameters that also maintain a quality neighborhood. So that's it.
Yes,
I'm just wondering, is this going to be like an administrative approval for a side yard pool so that somebody doesn't have to go to the Board of Adjustment if they do have an odd-shaped lot? Or are you simply removing all of the requirements? And so even if someone has plenty of room in the backyard for a pool, they're going to be able to come in and just put their pool in the side yard because they want to. So we need to make it clear, are we removing the side yard limitation? Or are we just basically giving administrative approval for a side yard pool if it meets the requirements?
no, I think our intent is to allow for the use of side yards under certain conditions, not just taking everything off of. But under certain conditions, they can do things in the side yard without having to go to the BOA.
Correct. I'm not intending to say you're on a larger piece of property and you have plenty of rear yard, but you'd prefer aesthetically to have your pool in the side yard. I'm thinking of the side yard as a last resort, per se, that there is no appropriate space in the backyard, but your side yard extends 40 feet.
So we're basically leaving it the same, but instead of having to go to the BOA to get approval, you can get administrative approval.
Well, we're not leaving it the same though, because we want to codify in the code what some of those circumstances would be. So it's not just the community development director going, yeah, okay, for them, we'll do it. I mean, we want to codify some of these things that would enable you to use the side yard. We don't want to just leave it open for, wild, wild west here. You can do whatever you want in the side yard. But, so we are doing, I'm not sure I'm understanding your question,
The
but
setbacks would have still applied even if they went to the BOA. So that's always been there. We have not, they would have had to have asked for that as well to avoid the setback requirement, which it's usually a safety factor here with regard to being able to get around a pool. So that's all, it's already there. So I'm just not wanting us to change things that we don't need to change. It seems like it's more the process that we're wanting to eliminate here of going to the Board of Adjustment to ask for this instead of getting it approved administratively.
yeah, I don't agree I don't agree with what you're saying, because in order to get a variance from the Board of Adjustment, you have to demonstrate a hardship that you didn't create. And so what we're doing here is that you don't have that burden to prove that you have some particular hardship. You have to meet certain requirements and have enough space and have certain conditions.
The odd-shaped lot is a hardship. It's a hardship that runs with the land. So the BOA would consider that. So that's not the issue. As I'm listening to you talking, the only thing that's changing here is that they're not having to go to the BOA. Because if we,
I don't agree with that statement.
I think what we're doing is we're expanding the limitations on the side of the back property so they can come around to the side. I can think of 3 houses right off the top of my head where they had to go to the Board of Adjustment because it's limited to the rear yard. And they had encroaches into the side yard, and they had to go to the Board of Adjustment. In fact, some had to go twice because people weren't the petitioner didn't understand what they were trying to do themselves. So I think we're expanding the definition of the backyard and the side yard to include more options. But I think in one way it is more administrative, but it's not. You don't have final say. There's still going to be certain situations where you have to go to the Board of Adjustment to make it happen.
and now, since you're allowing pools in a side yard, are you also going to be allowing pool screen enclosures in a side yard? Because many cities, even if you go to the BOA and they grant a pool in the side yard, it's almost always with the condition that they do not ever come back to ask for a pool screen enclosure, because that just exacerbates the problem, because a pool is flat, but the screen enclosure oftentimes is bigger than the house. So is that going to be allowed too?
It's,
He
my,
was in line.
go ahead.
I was just going to ask a question. Have you researched this issue with other jurisdictions? What is that? Do they allow stuff like this?
Some do. Some do. Some have the same tight restrictions that we currently have. There's not a set standard. Hillsborough County, for example, has a lot more flexibility with regards to what they allow within side yards. Municipal organizations generally tighten up the strings a little bit.
Okay, I was just curious on how they handle that administratively also, so.
All setbacks, all standards still apply.
Right, but they have no requirement of, it's just done administratively, it's not done before Board of Adjustment.
It's my understanding, yes, you are correct on that.
Okay, thank you, just asking.
Councilmember Fernandez.
My intention is to help people navigate, help people with uniquely shaped lots navigate the process of home improvements, which could include adding a pool, with an easier time than going before the Board of Adjustments. That that still comes down to a group deciding yes or no on the project, and even allowing administrative approval still is a similar. My thought is, if the space is there and it meets all of the required setback parameters, including having a screened enclosure and requiring more space, or if we were to establish farther setback or other criteria, that's what I'm looking at. There are multiple lots in this city that have maybe 16 feet in their backyard, but on either side of their house have 30 or 40 feet. And I don't want to make something so arbitrary when we know that we have a variety of lot shapes. I don't want where we're approving something that's going to encroach on a neighbor. But keep in mind, if you're in a neighborhood, I'm going to use my neighborhood in Crestover as a child, okay? Extremely narrow back lots. My father had to design a pool shape that could meet all the criteria, but it was very close. It was right on the setback line to the neighbor's lot. Their yard was just as narrow in the back, and their pool, there were a lot of the same shaped pools, so we were just as close as if the houses had been on side yards. So, I mean, but the parameters existed, and you built to meet those parameters. I'm just thinking that we can create a set of parameters that make it possible for someone to use a side yard when their backyard is not feasible.
So I think, let me see if we have consensus, because I think we do, but I don't think we're at a point where we can make decision. We have a lot of questions and not enough answers. I think what I'm hearing is that the council still has a desire to explore easing the restrictions on the use of side yards for various things, pool sheds. I don't know if screen enclosures would be part of that or not. That's one of the questions. What I think is appropriate here is for us to tell you at this point, yes, this is something we would like you to look at, because we think this is an area that we could make things easier for our residents. They could make more full use of their property. But I think this is an area where maybe the comparators that you use might be different than Hillsborough County. Because I think in this area, we might be looking at peer cities that are cities that we either are very similar to or would like to be similar. It's cities that are kind of upscale casual, like Temple Terrace. So, what's Mount Dora do? That's a city that's very vibrant. Dunedin is another good, well-run city that's been developed. Similar history, similar density. So some comparator cities that are successful, well thought of, doing well, they're not cities that we wouldn't really identify with. And what do they do with this? And I'm not always a fan of emulating what other cities are doing, because I'm not sure that a lot of cities are really doing all that well sometimes. But this might be an area that we look at that. And I think what I'm hearing, is that we're open to this idea. The real question comes down to what would the criteria be and what would the allowable uses be. I'm hearing that we don't want anything that's going to reduce the current setbacks or the 5 foot ease, those kinds of things. We wouldn't want to do that. And I know there's things that we haven't even discussed here, because I've heard Miranda talk about, the 60% coverage and the impervious, there's other stuff that we haven't even contemplated. So, and I think probably it would be a good idea to come back in a workshop setting to have the next discussion, instead of here's the ordinance and then we go off the rails and have a 2-hour discussion at a city council meeting about. That's not the way to do it. Let's have it here where we can flesh it out. Does that make sense?
I would agree with emphasis on the fact that we have so many weird shaped properties. I mean, if we were straight streets and avenues and so forth, but we curve and we go backwards and we go sideways, and there's, you go south of Bullard and you end up doing circles and you, how the hell I get here type of, excuse me. You've got weird shaped properties that you obviously can't do anything with part of it, with half of it. And there's a lot that's relative. There's properties out there that have already been, this has already happened with. And it's like, well, how come I can't do that? They did it. That type of thing. And it ends up being the same type of layout. So it's, you can't cover all of the options. You can't hope to cover everything. But at least, more mix of administrative, yes, you can do that because you're wider on the sides than you are depth in the back. I have a good sized backyard. But my parents had and they lived on Herschel, wider side yards, where if they'd done anything, they would have had to go into the side yard type thing.
Well, I think are we consistent with that guidance? Is that?
Yes.
Yes, city
Most
manager.
definitely.
Mayor, just for one thing for clarity, I know that Councilmember Fernandez had kind of alluded to some sort of criteria where in cases where they couldn't do things in their rear yard, potentially they might go to the side yard. If that's a little complicated, just so, I just want to make sure you all are on the same page with our staff before we start doing this, because we could always make the argument, well, you can build a lap pool in your backyard because you've had a narrow backyard. So it gets to be really arbitrary potentially. So is that what you want us to do? Because that will
I
take a
think
little bit more thought.
I think it would be a mistake for us to provide too much detail in what we want. Let's let them go out there, see what's out there, what triggers this. In my mind, I don't think this should be totally relying on you have a weird shaped lot. I think our goal here is to enable everybody to make better use of their, if you have a weird shaped lot, there's
All I'm saying
probably
is just
already an
cognizant
avenue
of that.
for you to get a variance. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it would be a mistake for us to give you that, like, okay, this, we only intend for this if their backyard is somehow precluded from, let's
Okay.
wait and see
So
what.
more open-ended then.
Yeah.
I think so, unless you disagree.
agree.
No, I have a big backyard, and I want to leave it open for me to play Frisbee, so I want it moved in the back. I mean.
Yeah, well, maybe my dog is back there.
Yeah, so I don't know, but to me, it's clear we want them to explore something.
Fair enough.
Look at it.
Yes.
Is that good?
Yes.
And we come back in a workshop setting for round 2 of this,
I think that's the critical part, come back in a workshop setting.
Yeah.
right? Mm-hmm. Okay, we good?
Yes.
Okay. So that's accessory structures. Commercial vehicles. I don't know, I hate to even open this part of the,
Please help us out.
Yes, sir. Many of us on staff feel the exact same sentiment that you've just expressed. But in opening this particular discussion, I would simply like to bounce back to some of the previous discussions. And this was primarily from last year's LDC workshop. There was concern brought forward from council with regards to, actually, I believe it was relayed through a council member from our citizenry with regards to advertising on the vehicles. And that's something that we do have to consider within our code, whether or not wrapped vehicles that display business names and things of that nature. I know some people will look at that and they think, well, it's just a passenger van or it's just a passenger sedan, and not interpret that as a commercial vehicle. Other people will look at that and say, wait a minute, that's clearly a commercial vehicle. It's a business sedan, they're advertising for the business, or SUV, et cetera, et cetera. So as we kind of unwrap this a little bit, that's one of the things that that staff hopes to get a little more clarification on from council's position. The next item that was discussed previously was a prohibition on the work-style utility beds on the back of trucks. We're talking about the diamond plate flatbeds, or in some cases, the fully built-out toolbox assemblies on the back of what would otherwise be a light or medium-duty pickup truck. And the last one was a discussion that occurred last year with council about adhering to the vehicle load capacity of 1 ton or more constituting a commercial vehicle. Now, I will tell you, you are not the only elected body that struggles with this. There is not a unified definition across any of our local jurisdictions as to what truly constitutes a commercial vehicle. I'll just throw some of the examples out there. Some communities regulate strictly by gross vehicle weight class rating. It's an easy metric. It's established by the federal government. And if people adhere to gross vehicle weight rating, that's a simple thing to say, okay, this is or this is not a commercial vehicle. Others actually look at the physical size, the length, height, and width of a vehicle. Very, very difficult to, take action upon something unless Tom and his team are out there with a little measuring tape. So you can imagine how difficult that might be. Others look at what are, I will call them old school informal classifications. And you'll know what I mean as soon as I open this up when I talk about a half-ton pickup versus a three-quarter-ton pickup versus a full-ton pickup. These are old school classifications that no longer compare to modern-day vehicles. Anybody who's purchased a modern-day vehicle, modern-day pickup truck in today's world will clearly tell you that a half-ton pickup truck has a cargo capacity much greater than a half-ton. So again, these are old school, old classifications. The other one that has been discussed is manufacturer designations such as 150, 250, 350, commonly known as in the Ford line of trucks. General Motors, GMC, Chevrolet, Dodge Rams, they use the 1500, the 2500, the 3500 series. Now, you'll notice that the first three digits correspond with the same manufacturer classifications that Ford uses. Again, these are not regulated by federal government. The federal government is clear with regards to how they classify, and when I say federal government, I can draw that all the way down to State Department of Transportation. They work on gross vehicle weight rating, and that's where that falls. So, things to consider as we venture into this. What do you like? What don't you like? What do you want to see parked in your neighbor's driveway all night? What's appropriate? There's also been some concerns or questions about someone who drives, maybe a handyman, who drives a pickup truck that would normally be considered a light-duty pickup truck that you or I might drive, but now they've added some accessory structure or accessory equipment to the back end of that vehicle, making it more of a work-style truck. So these are some of the concerns and questions that we have identified. Our current definition under 1240 under commercial vehicles talks about self-propelled or towed vehicle. We're talking about vans, trucks, and trailers used in commerce to transport passengers other than the driver and or cargo. Here is Hillsborough County. It's a little bit more involved, but it has a very straightforward approach. Any vehicle, when motorized or not, utilized for commercial purposes or designed by the manufacturer to be used primarily for commercial purposes or altered or converted for the purpose of being used, but not including vehicles having a capacity of 1 ton or less. And of course, not being a traditional domestic vehicle. And you'll see Tampa has a very short definition, probably the shortest of all of the ones that I researched. And I know it's small print. I apologize for the small print, but I did want to throw this up on the screen just so you can see what some of those federally regulated class vehicles look like. You can see there that a Class 1 vehicle is 6,000 pounds gross vehicle weight rating or less. Those are your smaller, that's your Ford Rangers, some of your Toyota pickups, your smaller, lighter weight, lighter duty pickup trucks. And then we get into the Class 2 pickup trucks. These are more commonly referred to as your full size. That's where you start to see your 1500 series or your 150 series. Some 250 series will also fit in this category. You see the 2500s and the 250s. And then you get into a Class 3. I think most of us in the room could easily look at a Class 3 pickup truck and identify it as a commercial vehicle. It's much heavier, much beefier, much more of stature with as far as the vehicle is concerned. And then, of course, this category, I didn't include all of them. It goes all the way up to, I think, 18, all the way up to the big super tractor trailers and things of that nature. But this is some of the examples of those light trucks, those medium trucks, and getting into the heavy-duty trucks. So with that in mind, I just have a couple of images here to throw up on the screen. The one on the right, I think has been discussed in the past. It's a cabin chassis that has been outfitted with a flat bed. Some people refer to these as diamond plate beds. Some people refer to these as working beds. Different marketing names for different manufacturers on these aftermarket add-ons. Some people will look at that and say, no, that's not commercial. Some people will want to know how it's registered, what its weight classification is, what its measurements are, what its payload capacity is. These are all different variables that different communities, I'll be honest with you, this was probably the broadest base of references from one extreme to the other that I researched coming into today. The picture on the left, upper left, that's actually a picture in our community today. That's a real picture from our code department. There are people, now I would look at that and I would argue that that is absolutely a commercial vehicle. It appears to be, regardless of the chassis construction and the chassis weight rating, it appears to be fully outfitted for some type of commercial work. But there are some people that would argue that that is not a commercial vehicle because maybe it doesn't tip the scale on what those gross vehicle weight rating numbers look like. So again, this is a tremendously difficult target to pin down, but hopefully after some discussion, staff will have a better idea of which way you'd like us to proceed. And with,
Go back to, please, the class slide, the different classes.
sure.
Thank you.
Mayor, I have a question.
Councilmember
Staff.
Chambers.
A question. You mentioned this is a headache for you guys. Do you have a recommendation?
You have to come up and identify yourself for the record, please.
I mean, I'd like to try to help, and our goal, Councilmember Fernandez is correct. We want to try to make it easier for our citizens and our staff to enforce these things, so.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Tom Baroni, Code Compliance. Thank you, Greg. That was a very great explanation, what we have, difficulties that we have today. My recommendation would be what we do now is I get challenged quite a bit from homeowners and owners of vehicles. And what we recommend is they show us the registration to the vehicle or the insurance card. That'll clearly state whether it's commercial or not. That's one of the tools that I approach a vehicle owner. As far as the vehicle itself, a lot of the vehicles that we're seeing, they're being modified. So they can get a F-250, but they take the bed of the truck off, and now they have a flatbed or a toolbox up on the side or tool bins on the side. So again, those are very hard to police. Again, my staff doesn't go over to a vehicle that's stored in the driveway and start measuring the width and the length of the vehicle. We just don't do that. That's actually trespassing. So we don't do that. So it's really, again, this is a very difficult violation to enforce. But again, the end is I go to the property and knock on the door and I say, I need to see your insurance card.
Yeah.
But there's really, I'm looking more for a recommendation from
Okay. Mr.
counsel.
Pauly, could you put up the slide that has our code on it, our current code?
This is, sir, is just the definition. It is not the regulation. The regulation basically is commercial vehicles are not permitted
in residential zones
for overnight parking.
Right.
There is conditions in there that allow them if they're doing on-site service work and things of that nature.
Loading, unloading.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Okay.
Yes, City Manager.
If I could, Mr. Pauly, could you put the Hillsborough County definition up? I was looking at this initially, and it struck me as this is not a bad definition.
I agree, sir.
I think this is probably the best definition I've seen today. I don't know what the council thinks of it, but this one, and Tom, if you want to give us your input, Mr. Maroney, but this one seems to be pretty clear cut for most instances.
That looks pretty good.
Yes, Councilmember Fernandez.
So when I read our definition, it sounds like an Uber or a Lyft, somebody who drives Uber or Lyft could be included, and those just look like regular vehicles. But I also happen to know people who have very large pickup trucks, and they're registered to their business. They're not identified necessarily as a business truck, but their insurance is paid through their business. They have very large trucks because they tow a very large boat. So it's not, I mean, that's their vehicle that they drive to and from work or whatever, but it's technically their personal vehicle, but they have their own company, so their company pays for it. I mean, I have a very hard time telling someone that they couldn't have their personal vehicle in their yard or in their driveway. So I guess it's some commercial vehicles is obvious. It's very obvious. If they're a plumbing truck and they've got all the accoutrements for that, or they're fully wrapped with their business, I can see that. I'm not really sure what to tell you about what I would consider maybe a heavier duty pickup truck, but one that they want the heavier duty pickup truck because they need to tow their larger boat. But that would be construed as a commercial vehicle because their insurance is also registered through their company.
So the vehicle you're describing, my staff and I, we don't mess with those vehicles. The ones that are concerning are the ones that have the bins on the side, the back of the truck. Like I said, the toolbox or the air compressor in the back of the truck. Those are the ones that it's a gray area, so I just need some guidance from council how you want us to move forward with those. But what you're describing, we don't mess with those vehicles.
Councilmember Schisler.
We have employees that we require they're on call to take the vehicles, right? Okay. How would you, now obviously if you need a step ladder to climb up into it, you're pushing the limit on the type of vehicle it is. But I mean, if we had an employee that's required by their job to take the vehicle home because they're on call and they've got to go ahead, one of our larger trucks that works for the water department, we don't want to create. Times have changed. We don't want to create situations that now they're in violation of the code. We used to be a bedroom community to USF and to the local areas where, you didn't have pickup trucks and you didn't have these type of vehicles. But times have changed. Yeah. We have to be cognizant of that issue. Wrapped vehicles, I think, is the hardest in my mind. If you want. My wife would kill me if I came home in a wrapped vehicle, but there's our people who that's their main, that's a significant source of advertising. The company pays for the vehicle and all that. We have to be careful we don't become too draconian with it. But in other words, I'm saying it's a tough one. We recognize the hardships that it creates upon you guys, but we have to be aware of what's happening in today's economy, in the future, and so forth. So
there's a lot of discretion that we do use.
Yeah, but that's not good.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be up to
that's what
you
happens.
guys making your own, that's not a good spot for you to be in.
Right. We have a gentleman that has a Verizon truck over here by Whiteway, and he used to park it in the driveway. So what we say, he just parks it there overnight, but we tell him to park it in the street area. So it's not on private property, but it's in the city. He's allowed to park it on the street as long as the vehicle's moved within 24 hours. So that's what we use.
So that's,
but it-
so we have him park on the street to hinder traffic, just so he's not in the driveway.
That's what I was thinking.
You're allowed to park in the street for 24 hours.
Yeah, I know,
As long
but
as you
still,
move it.
yeah.
That's
Let me
just-
make a suggestion to start
Yeah.
maybe some discussion about how to solve this instead of just better define it. So I agree with Mr. Bahia that this definition looks very good, the Hillsborough County definition. And it also says at the second, but it describes what a commercial vehicle is, and then it says, but not including vehicles having 1 ton or less. So anything less than a 1 ton pickup, or anything that's 1 ton, F-350s and below, right, are good. So if you'd go back to the slide where it says the classes. There we go. So this, as Mr. Schischler pointed out correctly in my mind, times do change, okay? Trends change. We're not, the only city on the planet of Mars, right? We're in a larger context, the region, the state, the trends of what's going on with affordable housing and work trends and commuting trends. And so you can sit down if you want, but we go to all kinds of economic development. I mean, we go a couple times a year, we go to these states, talk about commute times and what the trends are. There's a breaking point with that, by the way, of like 45 minutes is kind of the breaking point where it starts to break down. People are no longer willing to live and drive any further than that to their job. Commute times have been climbing in this region for a long time. Anyway, I say all that to say this. If we're not careful, this will be the next state preemption, right? If we start going crazy with this and affecting people's ability to live close enough to their jobs, this will be seen as an economic hindrance, and we'll have a state preemption that says cities can't do this, right, if we're not careful. So how about this? How about we adopt the definition that Hillsborough County has, or something very close to that, and then down below in the ordinance where we talk about the actual prohibited things that you can and can't do, right, we take out all the stuff about anything less than a class 4. Class 3 and below are allowed, right? Class 3 and below are allowed. We stay out of the business of if you're driving, if you work for Integrity and you've got a van that you're required to take home because you're on call, or you work for the city and you have your take-home truck because you're working utilities and you're on call. If it's an F-350, 1 ton or less, it's just a car. I mean, and I know that there will be people that say, oh my gosh, I'm going to have next door neighbor, he's going to have a utility bed F-250 in the driveway. Yeah, he might. We don't, you don't live in Avila. This is a city. It's not a gated community, and we're not, this is not an HOA. Back when I was on code board, part of the problem wasn't necessarily the presence of a commercial vehicle, it was the presence of multiple commercial vehicles. So our code could simply say that we prohibit anything class 4 and above that's used for commercial purposes. So if you're one of these guys and you've got an F-550 just because it's the cool thing to do, but it's not commercial, right? It's not commercial. If it's class 4 or above and it's used for commercial purposes, it's prohibited. That's easy for you. It says it on the side of the truck. You can check the registration or get the police to run the tag and see what the gross vehicle weight is. You can do that from the driveway. You don't have to get out. You don't have to. That's a simple. It's either this or it's that. There's the weight right there. And if you have anything that is allowed, class 3 or below, that's allowed, you can only have one of those per property. So like the welding business that happened at the house years ago when I was on code board, there wasn't the truck wasn't really the problem. The problem was he had 6 of them. Mm-hmm. And so it looked like an industrial yard in his driveway. Remember that case? And so No, this one was, I can't remember where it was, but it looked, I mean, it was flatbed trucks with welders on the back, and it wasn't, like, one of those would have been okay. But 6 of them, it looks like it belongs in the 301 industrial park. And so anything class 3 and below you can have, but you can only have one per property unless it's zone commercial or whatever, you know, you figure that part out. But you got one. And you can't have anything class 4 and above. That's my take. You got two things that are prohibited. You write that ordinance in an hour.
Just,
Yes.
and I think so if there's more than one, you're assuming that it's labeled commercial, right? Because if somebody has like an F, class 3 or below, but they have 2, but one could be just a F-250 pickup truck, you're okay with the second one being?
Yeah, it's a commercial.
It's commercial. It's clearly commercial. We can.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're a plumber or you work for Integrity, you can have your van at home. We don't need to be interfering with people's ability to have a job but you and your wife can't both bring your Integrity vans home, right? You gotta, you one.
Are we eliminating any mention about signage? Because if you've got a wrapped vehicle that's basically a rolling billboard, is that going to be okay now?
I mean, that's up to the council, but in my mind, yes.
You have to let it go. In this
Because
day and age.
I know in St. Pete, it used to be no signs on a vehicle. It's like if you wanted a sign, let it be a magnetic sign so you could take it off when you come home. They then changed that so that they allow 50% of the vehicle to have commercial writing on it. But that's it.
That's one of those, in my mind anyway, I'm not speaking for council, but that's one of those trends that change. I mean, years ago, we didn't have the ability to do a wrap.
You didn't have wrap.
That didn't exist, and now it does. I mean,
For one of my clients is a bathroom and kitchen, or, well, plumbing and electric technicians. And the vans are 100% wrapped. And they are required to be on call periodically. And if they can't take their van home, they have to come, they get a call, they have to come to the office, get the van, drive to the call. But there are technicians, I think we have one who he might even not be there anymore, but who wasn't allowed to take his van home. I mean, everybody else could take their van home, but I can't even envision a work van of that nature that's not 100% wrapped. I can't even envision one that would be 50% wrapped.
Yeah.
I personally don't have a problem with one vehicle of a commercial nature in somebody's yard based on the criteria that the mayor described. I mean, we are a city and we have housing for a variety of income levels and professions, and I just think that it's not an issue to me, and I have not had a high number of people in the city come and complain about that particular item.
I haven't either, but just one point of clarification. When you're talking about the size of the truck, I drive an F-150, okay? Would that automatically put that into the commercial realm? Because huh?
no, go back to.
Okay, all right, so
Hillsborough
good,
County's
okay, so you're just, so it,
Go back to Hillsborough County's definition. You can see that it would not be.
so it wouldn't matter at all, as long as there wasn't any
It would
kind
not
of,
be. See, used for commercial purposes.
okay, that's cool then, all right, good. You can still then have another vehicle.
Mr. Mueller.
We can leave this up. I mean, I
This is,
agree. I like
you gotta identify yourself for the record.
Ernest Mueller with the legal department. I agree, this is a great definition. And I might be stating the obvious, but I don't want it to go unthought about, which is at the very end, we're meeting the definition of domestic vehicle. Remember, that's going to be the Hillsborough County's definition of domestic vehicle. So if we take this one, we're going to have to look at our domestic vehicle code too.
Or take that out if it's unnecessary, which.
Okay, I like that.
So again, what we're thinking about, if you have one Ford Escort that's wrapped as a maid service, it's okay, but you can't have 2 of them in your driveway.
That was my suggestion.
Yes.
That doesn't mean.
No,
I
that's
would
fine.
agree.
I
Right.
agree with that.
But if you had one big concrete truck that's wrapped, that's not allowed at all.
If it's,
It's
if
if it's
a
over,
class four,
yes.
yeah, if it's
Not
over,
permanently.
if it's over a class 3, it would not
Yeah.
be allowed.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I think, Mr. Barone, you had something?
Tom Barone, code compliance. Just want to add that we allow right now commercial vehicles inside a garage. So you allowed, so the 1-to-1 ratio, would you allow, they store 2 of them inside the garage and
I'll
one
let
in?
you figure that out.
Okay, just want,
I think we should let
Yes.
them figure that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's in the garage, I mean.
Who cares?
It's your coffee table, we don't care about that. Does that framework
Yes.
seem logical?
Yep.
Does that seem logical to you? Does that seem?
and thank you very much.
And again, maybe before you distill all this into an ordinance and we have a 90-minute discussion at Tuesday night, why don't we bring this, maybe the same workshop, we could, I think that would be a better,
Absolutely. We can certainly, obviously, do our research, put together our best proposal to put in front of you, and then provide it in advance of the next workshop. And then, of course, we can go through it as needed at the workshop.
okay. And keep in mind the zoning too, if there's a commercial property, I mean, if you get it. We're good?
Yes.
Good?
Yep.
All right. Whew. Signs. We just redid signs not long ago, didn't we? I remember, yes.
I'm just thinking before you get to the signs, which is very complicated, you skipped over microbreweries. I don't know if you want to try that one. It might be easy.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Okay, craft beer and wine. I will tell you a little bit, just my own before you talk, is that I've been for years out there trying to attract a craft beer place here. And I don't know, a year and a half or so ago, before Mr. Pauly took over, I got some information about somebody who opened a craft beer place in unincorporated, the first one in unincorporated Hillsborough County. And they gave me a tour of their business, which is a great business, by the way. Tell you offline where it is, it's worth going. But he was telling me the hoops he went through to get, it took him over a year because Hillsborough County had to change their future land use map in order to accommodate, which is why every single craft beer place in Hillsborough County for years has been located in the city of Tampa. Mm-hmm. Every one of them. And they're either in the city of Tampa or Pasco County. Mm-hmm. And I never realized that until he told me that, and I'm like, you know what, you're right. He was the first one to open in Hillsborough County. It took him over a year. And because the reason I was talking to him was I'm like, hey, you need to open a second one here in Temple Terrace. And he goes, well, fix your ordinances and maybe I would consider it, but I'm not going through this again. It cost me a fortune and it took me forever. And he goes, and if you look at your future land use map, you'll see that you can't do what you're asking me to do. You cannot brew beer and serve it in the same location. And so I called the previous community development director and said, is this true? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, I'll talk to the city manager and said, get to work changing this because I've been out there for years trying to get somebody to come here. I had no idea that even if I was successful and got somebody, they couldn't do it. And so I am all in favor of changing this. In fact, I'm a little concerned that we've missed the big wave of craft beer, but
I have a question.
yeah.
Well, what was the purpose? I mean, I ate at a microbrewery, not last night, night before. So they brew beer and serve food. What was the purpose in the land use not allowing this use?
Well, I think it's an example of where times have changed. And back when the land use was set up, this business model didn't exist. And
But
now,
what were we concerned about?
I don't know, but the business model now, if you go, some of them have kitchens, but most of them do not. A lot of them, they're in the business of brewing beer. They don't cook. So they brew the beer, they have the tap room or an outside patio area where you can drink the beer, consume the beer, and then they have food trucks. A lot of them don't have kitchens. So, yeah, Mr. B.
Sorry, Mr. and Ms. Members of Council. So to Councilmember Fernandez's question, I think some of the history here is multifold. Is breweries sometimes have the pumps and oh God, I can't think of it. The
Vats.
Thank you, the vats. The vats give it off a little bit more industrial look. I think that's part of it. Second thing is not just microbreweries, more like micro distilleries, which is also another thing you may want to consider. I know we had one in my former community, and it took a lot of staff time because there was concern about, from the fire department particularly, as to the storage of the alcohol and things like that, and then making sure there wasn't a fire hazard, things like that. So I think probably for those main reasons, it hasn't been something that's been easily accepted. I mean, but you're correct today. I mean, think of it. You see it everywhere. To me, it would make sense to put this in just wherever you have restaurants. Why couldn't you have a microbrewery? So, but obviously that's up to the council.
Thunderbox has got a brewery. I mean, they're not as big as this room, and they're brewing beer.
What has to change?
I don't know. I don't know what.
I would agree. I think that we need to do what is required in order to make these uses permissible. Obviously, in very commercial areas of the city, it has to be in locations that are suitable, and then address whatever the concerns are regarding the fermentation, the actual process of making the alcohol. And as you said, there may be some fire concerns or whatever in terms of the actual material there. But I mean, it makes sense to me as the industry exists, and it's a very popular industry amongst people.
Mr. Schoen?
Considering there are so many beer places in St. Petersburg, I learned a little bit about this. They're somewhat concerned with the byproducts of fermentation. It can give people headaches. So that's why, you wouldn't necessarily want it close to a residential area. If you could limit it to an industrial area or something. It was that I looked it up. They had byproducts of the fermentation process can trigger headaches in some people, especially combined with the alcohol itself. So if you're actually in there drinking, it's going to do that. And then also certain types of hops used in brewing can also contribute to headaches in some people. So, and then there's sometimes an odor. I live right next to the Coors bottling plant in Colorado, and it smelled like potatoes in the whole neighborhood all the time. So anyway, so that's part of the reason why there are limitations as to where they are.
But they're major operations. I lived over at the Way Apartments on 30th Street back when Budweiser was in certain times of the day. You couldn't go outside. It was horrific. But that's major production facilities. What do we have to do to make it happen?
Well,
That was my question.
Yeah.
Can we just say, bring us back something that,
yeah, I think so. And there's different models of this that I think you would need to do a few things at the same time. One is, at least in my opinion, I can't speak for the council. In my opinion, we would allow this in most in commercial. I mean, like the downtown. I mean, if somebody wants to come in, like Dunderbox, and they're gonna, or the one that I was talking about in Hillsborough County. That's a classy. I mean, that's a great place to go, and that's not a bad neighbor to live next to. I mean, that's. So whatever we would need to change, you would have to tell us. I mean, we don't need to really know that detailed now. But the other part of this model is that some of these go into the industrial, like the 301 Industrial Park. I could see that where somebody would go into space there, which might be cheaper than a commercial, and they open up a tap room also. And so we would have to look at both sides. I mean, there's some in Pasco that are in an industrial park. You go in and it's in an industrial park. It's next to a warehouse here, but they have a tap room. So you'd have to look at both scenarios. And in my mind, I would be okay with both of those. But
I would agree. I would want to see industrial and commercial use.
You're good. I do have a couple of slides on this particular topic. If we could pull the slides up, please. It sounds like you've already answered the very first decision point for us. You sound to be collectively in favor of modifications in our code to allow for microbreweries. You've mentioned, I like the comment I heard earlier, if the district can support a restaurant, then it can probably support this. And then, of course, we can add in the industrial park area as well. The next, now this question does come up, and I will be honest with you, some communities do require this, some do not. And I would like to hear your thoughts on this. Should a food component be required in conjunction with a microbrewery, such as a restaurant on site?
You only have like 2 operators in Hillsborough County that have that model. I think Cigar City and Tampa Bay Brewing Company.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of another one that has that restaurant component. Most of the brewers don't want to be in a restaurant business.
That's correct. It's
Yeah.
What about Florida? Food is not
They do food
restaurant.
trucks.
Yeah.
I'm totally happy with allowing them food trucks or a kitchen, whichever. But if they don't, I mean, they would still have to go through the regular permitting process as a bar if they only serve alcohol and don't technically serve food.
I don't know what that is.
There is a different process for permitting of this, but it's not at the same level as your full bar.
Okay, so I mean, that would still be, that process would still exist whether we allowed restaurants or not, but I don't have an issue with requiring a restaurant on site.
For requiring one or not?
Not requiring one. Yes.
It sounds like you're in support of facilities that could support food trucks on site.
I would support food trucks, or if the business wanted to have a restaurant, I would support either of those.
Well, thank you for that.
Go, you look.
Yeah, I remember that in the days when they finally relaxed the old blue laws in order to sell beer and wine on Sundays, excuse me. I mean, there was actually a requirement that you had to have 40% food availability. I don't want to get to that type of restriction because you're talking 2 different types of operations. You're talking of a Florida Avenue or a Coppertail type scenario down on Adamo, or you get to like Tampa Bay Brewing where it's smaller but it incorporates the food. I think we should have the option of both being available, not required.
Very good, sir. I think I see agreement.
Yes.
Very good, sir. Very good. And just for your own edification, this number of production, this is the cap. I put Hillsborough County up there because they have it included in their code, but this is actually a state beverage cap. I can't really associate that number of gallons because that's a lot. But obviously, anything greater than that, now you're moving into a full production brewery.
But that does have an impact on the local government because that cap is precluding that business that I've been talking about. They can't bottle their product. They will never be able to add a bottling component because they sell that much beer on site. They don't have any excess to bottle.
Wow.
Well, but that's
I didn't hear
depending on your perspective, that's a good thing because you don't have to worry about them adding a bottling component now you get into kind of an industrial thing.
But can't we just prohibit like a bottling facility?
Oh, we could. That's another way to do it, I suppose.
I mean, that is not, to me, that's not a commercial use. That would be an industrial use that,
England type thing.
You
yeah.
wouldn't be able to bottle it.
I mean, if it actually got to that point and you're
We'd have to
getting to
think
that
about
point.
that because they do can it and sell it in cans
Right, the
at
growlers.
the site. So you got to be careful.
That's actually, that's a great point, by the way, and that's actually one of my upcoming decision points. If you'll bear with me for just.
Because even gas bars,
They can.
that would prohibit what he's doing now. I mean, you can go in there and they have a can machine. There's one can.
Well,
at a
I'm
time.
thinking of like a bottling operation to
Right.
sell at the grocery store or,
Right.
something it seems like we should be able to put some sort of
Yeah, I think we could.
limit.
I'm sorry, if you look here at the third bullet point, these are the three different models that are traditionally used. If you look here at the bottom,
That covers it.
Yeah.
yes, brewery to consumer for on-site consumption or retail carryout. And this is very popular as you look at, for the same reasons you
Yes.
just mentioned. But these are obviously still limited to their floor space and where they're set up shop at. But it is, it's on-site first and then carry out as an accessory. So yes, this type of model is very popular in this business.
Hillsborough County's ordinance should be a good go-by because it's new. They just wrote this ordinance for that business like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So
So that's, again, out of the three models listed there, the first one, the brewery to the wholesale, or the wholesale to the retailer, finally to the consumer. That's traditional distribution of a brewed product. The next one is kind of a hybrid between the two, and the last one would represent most likely, I think, what would fit best in our community.
I think that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
You good with this?
Yes.
Yes.
Carlos, we're good? Yes, sir. Okay.
Did you get what you needed?
All right, tree mitigation, did we talk about that in the past?
Yeah.
This is something that's currently in the works. You may have heard me mention it briefly. I feel like I've mentioned it very briefly in the past, but our current list of approved tree canopy is outdated and is in the process of being updated according to the state's Forestry Service. I do know that as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Mueller and Mr. Ferris have been working on it. I was hoping to have something to share with you today. Unfortunately, those of you that heard me mention earlier, Mr. Ferris is out all week ill, so that project didn't quite make it to the finish line for today. But I believe, Mr. Mueller, are you able to speak on that at all?
Well, come on up, Mr. Mueller, but in the interest of maybe saving some time, I also know we have money in the budget for a tree canopy master study. So,
That's also close to.
yeah, so it seems to me like we're going to have a pretty robust discussion based on the state changing some guidelines, and we're going to have the study, the results of the study. I'm just wondering if this conversation today is even worth having, or just waiting until we have all this stuff. I don't know, everything we discussed today is likely to change based on the state's guidance in the tree canopy study.
Well, the state's guidance is already available. It was previously published, and we have that. And to some degree, Mr. Ferris has already been operating according to the updated information administratively. However, our code has fallen behind and is not up to date on that.
Okay.
The other, if you bear with me here. The other things that I believe Mr. Ferris and Mr. Mueller have been working on is there's areas in our current mitigation code that have a void with regards to mitigation where trees are improperly trimmed or removed on already established properties. Most of the code talks about a developer coming in to develop a swath of land. That's what most of the code is speaking to with regards to mitigation. But we've got a couple of voids in there where we need to tighten up a little bit, because we've had it happen recently where property owners, business owners have improperly trimmed or removed trees, and we've had to kind of fill in the gap. And I know Mr. Mueller's more up to speed on that than I am.
Yeah,
We've lost our slides on our monitors.
On our monitors.
Is she in the,
Yes.
is she working on it?
but I can talk without that.
We give it back.
They're back.
Thank you.
Bullet point number 3 is one of the bigger areas here, as Mr. Pauly was saying. Our code talks about more in the terms of what trees have been removed during development, either on wooded lots, non-wooded lots, semi-wooded lots. Really didn't address just a single-family residence or somewhere else that had a tree taken down without a permit. How do you mitigate that? And one of the things that Mr. Ferris has been looking at, and I myself have been looking at, would be in that type of situation where proposing a one-to-one, depending on the size of the tree, a one-to-one replacement, or if it's a larger grand tree, perhaps a 2-to-1 replacement, meaning for the one tree, either, well, 1-to-1 would usually be a 3-inch tree, so if someone took down a smaller tree that was still protected, it would be a 3-inch tree, but if they took down a grand, it might be a 2-to-1. So in other words, either 2 3-inch trees or 1 6-inch tree, just to start developing these single, just these properties that are already developed that have trees on them, that we lose them. There was something else. Oh, and there was a formula in there for mitigation that was problematic because it really became into an unreasonable number of trees that that a property could never sustain. So that was part of this 1-to-1, 2-to-1 is being kind of drafted up to replace that. Now my understanding on the tree survey is that's only going to be on city property and rights of way, correct? So I don't know if it's going to be it's not a comprehensive tree survey throughout the city. Anything else you feel I'm missing on?
No, I think you
That's it. The tweaks are kind of minor, but we're really focusing on trying to, what do we do when someone takes down a tree without a permit or improperly prunes to where they've had an effective removal on property that's already developed, not in the development stage.
What is the gist of the update from the state? What is that all about?
The update from the state is talking about the actual approved canopy trees. Some of the trees on the old list are no longer considered indigenous to the West Central Florida area, and we would simply be updating that list to remove those trees and add the new trees.
Okay.
I have a
Yes,
question.
Councilmember.
In all of this discussion, a lot of the improper tree trimming is actually coming from utility tree trimming, and I understand we don't want to lose power and we have to trim around our power lines. However, they tend to butcher the trees to where I'm not sure they look like trees anymore. So that is a huge complaint from citizens. Will any of our mitigation standard for trees that are improperly trimmed affect any of the utility trimming? And are we, in our mitigation process, will we be suggesting as locations, like when a homeowner comes to us and they've taken down an oak tree and they've got this mitigation that they've got to put some back, are we going to require, and they've got utility lines in front, and are we going to work with that homeowner then to put an appropriate type of tree or in their yard, or how would that work?
If you'll allow me to, I'll take that second part of that question first. The short answer is yes. Mr. Ferris is very engaged in that exact service to our community. He would much rather do the work on the front side than to have to deal with someone who has allowed a tree to grow in the wrong location, and then now we've got a potential problem where a tree is taken out unpermitted, or in many cases, they're not even taking them out. They're not taking them out. They're just doing terrible jobs at trimming them that ultimately jeopardize the health of the tree. So yes, he is very forward thinking with regards to that. As far as the first half of your question, with regards to utility trimming of trees, this gets into easement rights. And in many cases, the utility companies hold those easements, and there are easement rights within those authorizations that our current proposal code is not intended to encroach upon that, and that would probably be more of a legal question as to whether that's even something we could enforce over an easement where they already have the easement rights to trim. I know in some of those easement rights, they not only can trim, but they can remove, depending on what we're talking about.
And again, I'm not suggesting that we stop any utility company from making sure that the utilities work. I'm just more questioning how we, as a city, the tree canopy, we are a tree city. So how we can work with the residents in recommending something. If you drive down certain streets, you'll see that the trees are very unhealthily pruned. But we don't, and we want to keep our tree canopy, but we have to obviously balance that with maintaining our electricity, because we've all seen what happens when that goes out. And so anyway, I was just wondering, and I get that they have an easement, but is there something that we can address regarding how, would it be better just to take the whole tree down versus trim it the way they are?
If I may, if you drive down 113th Street, there's still wires that are all screwed up because the trees were all grown around it. Okay, to me, when a utility comes in and has to prune back, these guys are pretty savvy in what they do, and it's like a bad haircut. It'll grow back, or you'll get used to it very quickly, and it won't be that big of a deal. I think so. We try to go in and regulate what that's going to look like and what they're going to do. It's like they know far better. And these are tree trimming services. It's not, Steve and his pickup truck with a ladder hacking down trees. These guys are Davey. These guys are experienced, and if they had enough complaints, they wouldn't be doing it anymore. So there's enough other trees that aren't around the surface wires that it's not going to impact our canopy, I believe, in the long run.
And I'm not suggesting that we regulate how the utility companies trim the trees. I'm thinking more as we look at having the right stock of trees or the right types, so that when residents come to us and say, this tree looks horrible, this is terrible, I can't believe we did this, that maybe the suggestion is we need to just take this, it's in the wrong location, this is the wrong tree for the wrong place here, this is what needs to go here. We have a lot of trees in our tree fund. So I don't know. I'm just trying to think of ways that we can maintain the attractiveness without sacrificing the utility service.
Absolutely, and as I mentioned earlier, yes, that is definitely a service that we provide through our city arborist. He does stay busy.
Just shed some light on that, your concerns. Tom Baroni, Code Compliance. I know Joe Ferris has spoken to me, and he has reached out to those contractors that do the tree trimming that you're concerned about. He's had conversations with them numerous times. There's different crews, like you said, there's Davey, there's all different types. So sometimes his conversation just goes in one ear and out the other ear. As far as last month, we had a few tree cases that came in front of the board, and one of them was a business on Fowler Avenue. They did some improper trimming, and Joe went out there and worked with the business, and he approved certain trees because there's high power lines on Fowler. So he recommended these lower trees and they just installed, I think, 15 to 20 trees. So if you go by there on Fowler Avenue, I don't want to say the name, but you'll notice it's a big improvement. So he does have conversations.
So I don't want to cut this short, but we're going to have to, the short answer is there's nothing we can do, because you're picking a battle you can't win. And the state is giving these utility companies more money to more aggressively trim the trees to increase resiliency throughout the state. So the local governments are saying, oh my God, you're hacking our trees, but the state's saying hack them more. You're not going to win this one. And it's just, I I don't know what to say about that, but you're not going to win that one. So we have to do some things with the trees. So the tree ordinance will be coming back to us. We'll need to, obviously, like everything else, we want to workshop that before. But it sounds like this is coming from the bottom up to us, so this isn't really something we're directing. It's got to be done. So, right? Okay, so we have at least one council member who would like a restroom break. So let's try to keep it like 5 minutes because we have some lengthy stuff. We got signs coming up, which I'm hoping won't be as lengthy as it could be. And then ADUs, which I know is going to, and then Councilmember Fernandez has a couple things, and we've got kind of an end time. So let's take a short 5-minute break.
Thank you.
See you back here at 11. All right, so 2.0, ready to go?
Yes, sir.
All right, everybody, so signs, and before we start this, I want to say a couple things because hopefully we can make this something we can manage. I seem to remember last time we talked about signs last year, this was staff-driven. There was some businesses that wanted to do some things like different, on this particular building, I think Salem was one of them where there's some signs on 2 corners or something. I don't remember this being a wholesale revision of the sign ordinance. It was more surgical about certain, and I don't think we had a lot of heartburn about at that time. I don't remember us having a lot of heartburn over the surgical changes that you were proposing. I didn't sense that there was an appetite for wholesale sign changes. We don't want to become like Fowler Avenue down there. But am I correct? This was rather pretty narrow surgical kind of revisions. It wasn't.
Yes, sir. I would agree with that completely. In doing a little research and looking back on this, I will tell you that, and I do have one slide here prepared for it. This question seems to come up from time to time, and it has to do with primarily businesses that are corner lot situated. We have in the past, through waivers, allowed development to construct, and I don't mind saying the name because it's prominent in our community redevelopment area. Chase Bank, for example. Chase Bank sits right on the corner there by the fountain, and by code, they're allowed 1 wall sign. And they, through their site review process, proposed for multiple wall signs. And when I say multiple, I mean 3. I think there was a lot of discussion back and forth at that time, and it resulted on having 2 approved. And those 2 that were approved were in association with what staff is referring to road frontage. So my question to the council this morning with regards to signs is this a condition that the council would like to see brought forward as a waiver, or would the council like to see a minor modification added to our code to allow businesses that are situated with multiple road frontages up to 1 qualifying wall sign per road frontage, not to exceed 2 road frontages?
Council?
I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that.
I mean, if it had been a second business that fronted versus 1 business with the 2, there would be a sign there for that second business. So I don't think that's, so I'm in favor.
Me too.
Very good. And what that will do, just so everyone is clear, that would prevent an additional waiver if it were to go through a site review process, because that's currently how we have to manage it, is it has to come through to you.
And here's a streamlined process. They're getting to the same spot, but we're removing some of the hurdles and work that has to happen. So
Can we spend a couple minutes on the overall, the second bullet point?
Yes, sir. The overall size of any given sign is based on, we call it the facade coverage, and different districts provide for different percentages. I believe the common one, I'm going to defer to Mr. Hall for this. Mr. Hall, would you mind coming to the podium to help with this one? I believe 20 or 25% is the standard, but I'll let Mr. Hall speak to it more clearly.
Malik Hall, planner for community development. Yes, it is 20%. So, for example, for even the plaza across the street, ideally for the all the signs, the entire wall sign coverage for the entire building cannot exceed more than 20% of the building facade. Obviously, since there's individual units, we typically go by the unit facade if we can. So this is your facade of your tenant space, your unit space. Your wall sign cannot exceed 20% of that. Because ideally, if it's proportional, it will be 20% of the overall building facade.
So we're talking strictly wall signs?
Yes, strictly wall signs. Not ground signs, not other.
I don't know what it would be called. Yeah, okay, so I better understand that. What about the other signs?
There's a completely different set of standards for the ground signs, and to this point, I don't believe.
But these aren't proposed changes.
No, I'm just, okay. Well, I've been entertaining an issue for the last couple of months with somebody, and I've been trying to say, go work with community development, find out what the deal is. Okay, wall signs, it makes better sense. Okay, I'm good.
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
Thank you.
And Mayor, honestly, that's all I had on this particular item.
Okay, so that was very surgical. This is one wall sign per, that's easy.
Per road.
See, that was quick. 6 minutes. We were good. Okay, now, let's see if we can stay on this roll, but let's do this justice, and that is the issue of auxiliary dwelling units.
Very good, sir. And yes, this can easily be a bowl of spaghetti, if you will, based on all the twists and turns with regards to these types of improvements on residential. Obviously, we're talking about improvements on a single-family residential lot. Our current comprehensive plan does provide for it in the future land use categories R4 and R9. That's where it draws the limit. It does not carry on into the larger multifamily future land use categories. But for our what you would recognize as any property that is zoned as a single-family zoning district, that's where our comp plan provides for it. And again, you heard me mention earlier, as I introed this slide the first time, there's a lot of positives behind accessory dwelling units, but obviously because you're introducing more density on a lot, you're introducing the potential of rental space that may or may not be, we may or may not have the ability to regulate at the detail the city wishes to regulate, and other concerns. The pendulum swings both ways when it comes to accessory dwelling units. Oops, I'm sorry, I hit the wrong button. As you know, as you've mentioned, previously discussed, at this point, I would like to defer to the city attorney. She does have a update on newly proposed legislation that just began circulating. I think I saw it for the first time yesterday, maybe earlier in the week. She does have an update on some proposed legislation that may preempt a lot of what our discussion is here to talk about.
Ms. Shoshone.
This is House Bill 943. There is a companion Senate bill. It was, I believe, just introduced on the 24th, so we just all got it. Florida League of Cities is not happy with this. It's being pushed as to the public as a streamlining process, but streamlining is not always good. Their idea of streamlining is just get rid of all zoning codes. So I could get into a lot of it. It first addresses basically the Live Local Act and affordable housing. There's quite a bit on that, but I'm going to, since we're talking about ADUs, I'm going to skip down to that section And if you want to hear about the rest of what we're going to have to do, I can, and then there's time, I'll tell you later. But for ADUs, this bill is going to require local governments to adopt ordinances allowing ADUs in any area zoned for single-family residential use. It provides that local government may not directly or indirectly increase the cost to build an ADU by imposing restrictions on rental terms that do not apply to other housing uses within the same district. So I think when this was first brought up at our previous workshop, some discussion did occur as to whether the ADU would be rented out affordably. You cannot do that. So it's interesting that they have thrown this into the bill, hoping to deal with the affordable housing crisis, and then tells you you have to allow ADUs, but you cannot require them to be rented affordably. We also cannot impose parking requirements or design restrictions that do not apply to other housing uses within the same district, and we cannot require discretionary approvals or other standards that do not generally apply to other housing uses in the same district. It is removing the current law requirement that the ADU must be rented at an affordable rate. It requires local governments to submit an annual report beginning this October with information about the number of ADU applications and the number of ADUs within the jurisdiction. It provides that a property owner may not be denied a homestead exemption solely because the property contains an ADU, and allows the property assessment for the ADU to be separated from the homestead property. And that's it for ADUs. As I said, there's a lot of other stuff in here having to do with what we're going to have to allow and what we're not going to be able to do in approving affordable housing projects. So.
Okay.
So with that,
Go ahead, Councilman.
Well, I have a couple questions. So if according to that, we will have to allow ADUs in all of our residential neighborhoods, is there the ability to put criteria as in setbacks and acreage, usage of your, the impervious coverage of your property and things like that?
It doesn't, this bill does talk about the lot coverage and impervious surfaces. It doesn't specifically include that limitation in the ADU section. So again, this is not written very well, and you could probably, as long as they're not telling you, as long as they're not restricting you in something, you can do that. As I said, it is addressing that in the rest of this bill for affordable housing projects, but not under the ADU section. So anything that you're building is going to have to adhere to the already established setbacks. If there's like a 6-foot setback on a side yard or a 25-foot setback in a rear yard, it's got to fit within the buildable footprint. So you know, it's going to have to adhere to that. If you want to put some other type of a restriction on it, I'd have to know what it is specifically.
And before you, because you probably answered this too, then would the same apply to parking? So for right now, you have to have some sort of surface to park off your driveway. And they didn't say anything about requiring parking, like additional parking space for that unit, but our parking requirements would still apply to anybody parking there.
It says you can't impose parking requirements or design restrictions that do not apply to other housing uses within the same district. So if you have them already in that district, you could impose them on the ADU as well.
So those are-
So when Mr. Schoen was reading this, it almost was verbatim what my former state of New Hampshire did a few years ago. It was exactly the same, which basically they came through and said you have to allow ADUs everywhere, and you can't impose additional restrictions. So there's probably other states, they just copied it from other states, which is typical for a lot of legislation. I don't know if the bill has legs, but right now, just based on that one piece alone, I wouldn't be shocked if that version of just the ADU piece gets adopted, because again, it is something that's been done elsewhere. So it could become an issue that you can't control. It becomes one of those things that the state just passes, and we just have to deal with it as a community and try to find the nominal controls that we have. We typically, as you mentioned, setbacks, things like that. As long as we apply what we're doing for everybody else, typically that's acceptable. We just can't. What a lot of communities, their first reaction was, oh, we'll just have a different standard for parking or a different standard for this to kind of control it, and that was what the legislature said no to.
So then we should, in this discussion, be talking about how to make sure that an ADU doesn't encroach into a neighbor's space or the setback, or something that makes it so that unit is not invasive to the neighborhood.
If I could have from our perspective, I think the reason we put it on the agenda today was really just to see does the council want to pursue ADUs, first and foremost, because we're not sure if the council wants to pursue ADUs. If you don't want to pursue ADUs, then if we get preempted by the state, we'll deal with it then. But if you do, obviously, we can start the framework and come back to you during that workshop, another workshop, and with some structure.
You had a question?
No, I was just going to say we need to wait and see what the state does.
Well,
To answer your question, I'm in favor of allowing ADU.
so I haven't had a chance to read these bills because they were just filed this week. I did look and see neither one of them have been sent to committee yet, but they were just filed, so that's not a sign. Pam, if you've read them, let me ask you this: is there anything in the current version? Now it'll get changed if it goes to the committees, but is there anything in the current version that gives a date, like the short-term rentals? If a city has an ordinance that governs this prior to a certain date, we're grandfathered in. And the reason that I asked this is if we did allow ADUs, I think the most important part of our proposal, whether we do it or not is up to the council, but the single most important part of this is that the primary residence has to be owner occupied. I think that's the single most important part of our proposed ordinance. Is there anything in there that would preempt that if we had an ordinance passed that requires the primary residence to be owner occupied? Because if we wait and we're preempted, we can never do that.
That's my
But
concern.
if we do that now, would we be grandfathered in, or would we be preempted anyway because it didn't exist before a certain date?
Yeah, good point.
Hang on, let her.
Yeah, that's fine.
There isn't any specific date in that section that's saying, that's going to say, okay, if you miss that boat, you can't do anything. So there's not anything in that particular section. In the bulk of this, because this is just a very small piece, there's dates mentioned, but they were in 2023, so we've already missed that one anyway, so thanks to them for that. They're not giving you any chance. But I think although it says we cannot impose restrictions on rental terms, I don't think that's the rental term for just the ADU itself. So I see nothing in this that would preempt us from saying that that the main structure has to be owner occupied.
Okay, so here's.
Because in some of the commentary on this, it says that the purpose of this ADU section is to give greater allowance for the generational, for having older family members live there, younger family members live there, caregivers to live there. And so that's part of the reason for it. But obviously, you're not going to be able to restrict it to family members. It's going to be able to be rented to anybody.
So here's I'm thinking while I'm talking, which is always a big danger, but I like to think and then talk. But right now I was hit with this bill that I haven't read. But it seems to me, I don't want to say I don't care whether we do ADUs or not. I don't think it's going to change the course of our city one way or the other. But if there's bills and these bills start getting legs and going through committees and which they may, it's too early to tell, it would seem consistent with the previous legislative activities that they will get legs. Seems to me like if we have the possibility to pass an ordinance before this has an opportunity to get passed and signed, that requires at a minimum the primary residence be owner occupied. And then we hope that we don't get preemptive, because if we don't have that, we almost certainly will be preempted from passing it after the statute takes effect. So this kind of changes things in my mind. Is I'm almost thinking like, how quickly can we get this ordinance passed so that we get it done before the state gets it done? The other thing that's of significance that I was going to say, but it's kind of been overcome by this discussion, is I'm not against ADUs under certain conditions. I know we're concerned about the short-term rental thing, but the owner-occupied primary residence takes care of a lot of that. You don't have an absentee. The owner lives there, so the short-term rental in the backyard is not going to be, where was I going with that? I just think we need to get perhaps something passed before this gets answered for us and we can't do anything.
And I haven't fully thought this out. I'm just sitting here now thinking, okay, what happens if the owner moves out? They want to rent their property. Now they've got,
Yeah, I don't know.
they're going to have two rental properties there.
That's
So
what
I
we
have to
don't want.
further think
Right,
about this.
That's what we don't want.
Because then if they do move out, which you can't keep them there, obviously, and they have the right to rent out their main house, is this going to now prevent them from renting out the ADU, or will it need to be occupied by the people renting out the main house?
See, I think the goal last year for the ADU discussion, our goal was that one or the other of them needs to be occupied by the property owner. Now, if it's an elderly couple and they want to move into the ADU and rent out the main house, they can do it. But the owner has to be living in order for the other part of the property to be eligible to be rented. The owner has to live in one or the other. That was our.
Because essentially, they could both turn into short-term rentals.
That's what we're trying to prevent. Go ahead.
Okay. Let me wind up pre your comment, because that just threw a monkey wrench at the whole, that bill you brought up throws a monkey wrench at the whole thing. What are we trying to accomplish? Just to establish an ADU policy? What do we have current? We don't have anything at this point. So anything that you want to build on for generational issues has to be attached with a doorway between the two. I know, I'm living through that now. But so we're trying to come up with something. Now we're going to have to try and come up with something so that the state can't come in and say, okay, you have to allow it irrespective of what you have on the books now. You have to allow ADUs. Is that what that's what your summarization is going to be? Unless you have something on the books, maybe, prior to that's grandfathered in.
Well, that's what the bill
That
says.
changes the whole thing. The whole conversation
I know what I was
changes.
going to say. I do think it's significant. I've been in office 9 years. I don't know about you guys. I've not had a single resident come up to me and say and push me to, I have this apartment that I'd like to. Nobody in the community has ever come up to me and said, would you please allow ADUs?
I have.
Have you?
I think for all of the situations that I know of, either they were existing already because they're the 1925 house, or somebody has already gone and gotten a variance and built their ADU. It has not come to me as an issue. However, I have the same concern that the mayor expressed, and that is if this bill does actually become law and ADUs have to be allowed, I would rather this city have something, an ordinance in existence governing how they would be created before this bill would get passed, because we did already have this problem with the short-term rentals, and we missed that window to have any kind of regulation at the city level. So that would be my concern. And I have a question about if we do put requirements in place, in addition to requiring one of the structures be owner occupied, if we put regulations in place that require a certain setback or a certain coverage of the property is allowed, or whatever that criteria is, there might be some lots in this city that an ADU that it's not buildable, it's not even possible. How would that conflict with the state saying we must allow it in all neighborhoods?
If it's not going to fit because it's going to encroach into a setback, then it's not allowed. As I said, it's got to be within that buildable footprint. This doesn't change that.
Okay.
And if there's not going to be room for a paved parking space, then this doesn't change that. It just says that the law that applies to other housing uses, like a single-family home, within that same district, we can impose those same requirements. We just can't impose additional ones. So if you come up with any type of limitation that does not conflict with this, you can do it. It's when you conflict with state law, then you're preempted.
And I think the owner, to me, that's, I don't think the ADUs are gonna be an issue if we have an owner occupied requirement.
How would it work?
Well, the owner's gotta live there.
The primary portion or the?
They can live in either one, but the owner has to live on the property. So one or the other. To me, I mean, I know people that got old and they moved out of their main house and into their garage apartment because they didn't want to take care of the big house. They rented the big house out. But they're on property. And so you can't, that's, to me, that's the key to this. And whatever else we put in there is whatever else. And if the state passes this and we can get in and not be preempted because we have this already. Now, that's no guarantee of that. They could preempt us anyway.
Yes.
But at least we have a chance.
I'm agreeing with the owner occupied, but I'm saying, what does that get us as far as short-term rentals for the other portion?
Nothing. We can't do anything about that, but I think if it's a short-term rental, I don't think it's going to be, we got short-term rentals all over the city.
I know.
The problem ones are the ones that are party houses. The owner's not there.
I got two houses down from me.
But people are house hacking now. I mean, the house behind me sold and they rent out rooms.
Yeah, that's what's happening.
So they're house hacking. I mean, they got people in and out of there all the time. They're standing in the driveway waiting for the Ubers to pick them up. I mean, it's not ideal, but that's where we are. So anyway, Mr. Bria.
Sir, just wanted to mention that I do know in other states that owner-occupied is something that is the premise of the ADU. The communities have really fought back on that. They wanted to make sure they could have owner-occupied for all the same reasons. So I don't think that would be something that we'd be that far in left field about if we wanted to pursue that. In terms of timing, I just want to ask Mr. Pauly, because we have the unique circumstance here in Hillsborough County. We have to get our Chapter 12, is it Chapter 12?
It's got to go to the planning.
It's got to go to the Planning Commission, and there's only certain times that they meet. Do we know at the next time, just thinking logistically, how would we do this?
Well, no,
we're probably too late for March, but it's.
Oh, definitely too late for
Yeah.
March.
Yeah.
So I believe it's June, September, and then December,
Okay, so,
maybe quarterly.
So if we could get in June to the planning commission and then bring it here, I mean, we could potentially get this passed by summer. Hopefully this won't be one that they're on fire to get signed as soon as it's, you know.
so a question for you, if we have, let's say, an ordinance written, it goes in front of the planning commission for review, does that have to be the final ordinance that's approved by the city council, or does it then, once the planning commission has said that this is an allowable use, could it then come back before city council to finalize and make some changes to the order? And I'm asking just because we might be able to get something in front of the planning commission that the city council is 90% good with, get the planning commission to approve it, and then it can come back before city council to be finalized, or will that process not work?
I believe that process can work if we limit modifications after their review to non-substantive matters. We did something similar to that with the fence ordinance that you just recently considered and passed. The Planning Commission saw the earlier version. They approved it in content. And please remember that the Planning Commission is an advisory panel to this board. This board holds technically, and I don't know that they would ever do it, technically they could say, no, this is inconsistent. And this board has the jurisdictional authority to set aside their recommendation and make your own finding and decision. That would not bode well with the development of our comprehensive plan. But just to give you an example, that did happen with the fence ordinance. As you know, it went back and forth several times for additional changes and updates. But we did keep our liaisons in the know throughout that entire process.
So what I'm asking then is, if we were able to go in front of the planning commission, the planning board, and say, we are going to allow ADUs in the yard, but not necessarily have the very specific details.
No, you have to have your ordinance.
That's what I'm asking.
They have to have
Yes.
the ordinance.
But I'm not saying we wouldn't have the ordinance, but I'm saying we would have an ordinance, but potentially then they agree to it, and we've established setbacks in the ordinance of 5 feet from the rear yard and whatever the specific building requirements are. And then it goes to the planning commission, planning review board, they approve it, but then it comes back to council, and maybe we say, we don't like the 5 feet, we want it 15 feet. I mean, like, is that?
Those things are already established. The ordinance doesn't need to contain those things. The ordinance, all the setbacks and all that, that's in different.
But that's what I'm asking, is it, because we would want to be able to establish the setbacks, that's
But it's
already in our
established.
building, so we don't have to
We
do
don't have
that
to do
in
all
this. Well, then it's strictly, will we allow ADUs or not?
It's programmatic. It's not
Yeah.
setbacks and construction types and all
That's what
that. All of that is already contained
Then
in
we don't
chapter
have to worry.
12 of our
Okay.
code. So all we need to address are ADUs, whatever restrictions we are legally entitled to and want to put on them, like I think we should put owner occupied. That's about it, really. I mean, it's not really that difficult to.
But is size also,
She's scowling.
No, I'm thinking ahead
Yeah,
to
that's,
people wanting to put ADU, coming to Board of Adjustment because they want to squeeze an ADU in and it's going to encroach into a setback. So I'm already thinking about all the other things. But, that would be, that would probably be a reason for a board to deny an ADU on that property, because going back to the requirement for a variance, if you can make reasonable use of your land, that's all you get. So to come in and say, I want a variance to squeeze an ADU in, the board should say no to that. So, but I'm just thinking, as you talk, it makes me think of other things occurring, so.
but also is size, I know that the setbacks and the building requirements, will that in and of itself dictate the size of the ADU? Or would that be something that we have to specify in the?
So just based on my experience up north, size is something you could regulate. That's what a lot of communities did up north, is that they created a minimum and a maximum. Minimum is usually set by the building code for a habitable space. But they were concerned about these little, creating this thing where it's this tiny little thing that was not really safe for anybody to live in. But they were also concerned with making it so big that basically it becomes now you have a duplex.
Yeah, it's two living units.
Yeah.
But you had some of that last year, didn't you? Didn't we have a square foot?
It did have to be smaller than the primary residence.
But I thought you had some of that detail in the last year's discussion. Did you not? Am I wrong?
Give us just a moment, let her check that.
I thought
it's
you
not
had
coming to
some,
mind.
there were some, I thought we discussed some limitations on min and max sizes and.
I don't remember.
Remember, we talked about garages and, was that part of it? And-
Closing in the garage type thing.
Yeah, we had
Well,
some.
Yeah, we did.
Yes, we did talk about garages, converting of a garage. We did talk about placement on the property. We did talk about additional parking to satisfy, I think the request at the time was one additional parking on an approved surface per bedroom.
Yeah, we talked about.
So we talked about those things. I don't remember establishing a minimum or maximum size. I could be mistaken on that.
What about plumbing and heat and cooking abilities and electrical
Yeah.
and so forth?
Usually when these items are drafted in code, the phrase they use is dwelling unit. Currently, the reason we don't permit them on the standard is because all of our, unless those that have been grandfathered, of course, all of our single-family residential pieces allow for a single dwelling unit. That's what prevents a accessory dwelling unit from being placed. In a dwelling unit, think about eating, sleeping. There's one more there. Help me out. Bath. Thank you. Eating, sleeping, and plumbing. Bathroom. To qualify as a dwelling unit, you have to have these things. Now, Mr. Bahia referred to a type just a moment ago. We've actually seen, not in our community, of course, but through our research, we've seen where people take basically a garden shed, a little teeny tiny thing, and they convert it into a dwelling unit. I think that would be something we would want to avoid based on.
Okay, so
We can set a minimum.
we're running short on time here, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I'm hearing some consensus here that we're favorable to this under certain conditions. We need to set some size limitations. I think we should require owner occupied of one of the dwellings.
Yes.
And then there's some other things that you guys are gonna need to talk about garages. But I don't think, can't flesh out all the details of this right now.
But when we're talking about this bill from the state and they're talking about an ADU, we're trying to, but they're not necessarily talking about a garage being converted and like an existing structure on the property being converted into a living space. They're talking about building a new standalone.
Yes, not attached.
Okay.
They
So it's
define
an
it as not
it's an
attached?
accessory. That's why it's an accessory dwelling unit. If you're just converting your garage, I mean, we don't stop that. I think they should, because it makes a parking problem, but anyway, nobody stops that from happening, so
Okay,
that
so we
doesn't
wouldn't
count.
be addressing garage conversions in
No.
this ordinance. We'd only be talking about detached. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, excuse me. But I know of a few that have been built, detached garages that have been built lately that have two of the three components. They have either it's a home office and wanted a bathroom, but wasn't allowed because that makes it a dwelling unit or a kitchen or something. So very simply, these can be converted to add a kitchen unit, and that's a dwelling unit. So, so these could be retrofitted easily to become dwelling units.
But it's detached.
It's detached, yes,
Okay.
yes.
If I may, sir, All of the research that we've acquired on this item talks about ADUs in 3 separate categories. They actually do talk about garage apartments would be one. They talk about completely separate structures, or they talk about structures that are attached. Maybe you blow out a back wall and you build that way, or something of that nature. I know we don't have it in this area, but they even talk about basement conversions and second-story conversions. And there are standards in there that require separate entrances for these facilities. They are completely independent of the primary. They have their own kitchen, their own bath, their own sleeping quarters, et cetera. So to be consistent with what's out there, we would probably want to include some of this material within our code, even if the heart of the code isn't speaking to some of these other aspects. But as Councilmember Chambers just mentioned, it is known to staff that there are people that will try to circumvent their way through the code by building. We hear this where they're building an office. It's a studio office, and then our inspectors go in and realize it's fully plumbed for bathroom and kitchen and things of that nature. So it is happening. Our inspectors are aware that it's happening within our community, and in many cases, those types of construction projects are being diverted into what correctly meets our code. And to answer your question, Mrs. Robinson did find what you were referencing. The previous director prepared a draft that provided for the accessory dwelling not to exceed 33% of the main dwelling, or is it a minimum?
Or 800 square feet, whichever is
Or
less.
800 square feet, whichever is less. So yes, you are absolutely correct. It is in the draft from last year.
Okay. So is it your desire that we have them distill this into a proposed ordinance that hopefully we can get before the Planning Commission in June? And then it would come back to us for 2 readings, and yes, we can make modifications to it at the 2 public hearings. Can't be scrapping it and starting over. It would have to go back before the Planning Commission, but we do have the flexibility to make modifications at that point. Is that,
Time is of the essence.
Yes,
is that your,
yes.
In agreement.
And then with the components of one of the structures needs to be owner occupied, and with whatever land use size requirements that we've determined.
and the minimum, maximum sizes?
Yes.
Got to be practical.
Okay. Now, because this one is time sensitive more than the others, we may, if I would think this one needs to be kind of priority, we may need to convene the workshop to discuss this, even though you may not have the other stuff ready.
I agree, sir.
So I think this and it probably won't be that long of a workshop, but
Right.
time is kind of crunching on this one.
I agree, sir.
I have no problem having multiple workshops on these things.
So we're good.
Same.
Okay.
We need to.
Carlos, you all right with this? Okay.
We can't do this at council.
So we have 15 minutes, actually, we have 16 minutes, and Councilmember Fernandez had a couple of items.
Okay, so again, I think that we've started the process of this, but with the consistency within the city for building and permitting issues, any way that we can streamline that process and make it very simple so that, I mean, I'm thinking a tab on the website that just says building in Temple Terrace, and then you click on it and you see all the different projects that most homeowners might choose, like fence, shed, et cetera. When they click on it, it's a live link and it takes them to a fence. Here's what's required. Pavers, here's what's required. That sort of thing. And that way the staff all has one reference, the public all has one reference. And then this would just be a review item just to see consistency with area jurisdictions, not that I'm expecting us to be the same as Plant City or Hillsborough County or Tampa, but if our regulations or requirements seem very burdensome as compared to some of the other jurisdictions. By burdensome, I mean if you want to put a paver patio, this is an example, a paver patio down, and in the city of Temple Terrace, you're required to get the most high-level survey with a full tree count, et cetera, and the cost is $2,000 to get that survey versus Hillsborough County where you're required to just get a simple boundary survey. That's all. Just maybe just a review to make sure that we're not out of line with reasonable requirements. And then my third item, which I'll bring up at goal setting also, is just with the 1925 homes and the historic homes, they're all out of compliance with our current code. So I don't know we've talked about this. They usually have to get variances to do pretty much any exterior additions to their property.
So we set up the board, isn't it?
Well, yes, but also I wasn't sure if we needed to actually create some sort of building code, I don't want to say carve out, but building code that's maybe specific. So for the Historic Preservation Board, they would need to come before the board if they wanted to make substantial modifications to their house and not go through the variance board as well. But I was just thinking of things that aren't necessarily modifications, but just putting back a porch that used to be there. So anyway, that.
And I'll have to check into this, but years ago, in my former employment, we had the same issue. We had buildings that dated to the 1800s, and it was the same concern. And what we did there is there's an international building code, historic building. There's an international historic building code, which if we haven't adopted, we can look to adopt. In my former community, that's what we did. We adopted that, and that gives you a little bit more flexibility for these older structures, because a lot of times not so much probably our 1925 homes, a lot of the stuff, even the roof components, whatever it might be, building wall components, they were made custom.
Yeah.
And so there's not a standard that you can just go to, like every 2x4 is like this, every nail's like this. Things were made, and that's what that code allows you. It allows you some extra flexibility for interpretation on the part of our inspectors and our building officials. So we'll look at that and see if that's something we can explore. And if we already have it, I'm seeing Mr. Foss give me a look, so maybe he should come up and.
Make sure you identify yourself.
Dallas Foss, the building official for the city. In order to do that, the structure has to be declared historical. They have to register that structure to apply the historical regulations to it.
That might encourage people to.
That may encourage them to register homes as historical, because you have to be declared historical on the state or federal registry to enforce the historical restrictions on it.
Okay. So if we did that, then the board would have purview, and then the board could, if there was any, beyond the code, if there's anything that stipulated still needed some relief, they could go directly to the board.
That would give the board some guidance too, because as it stands now, they would be left, like I'm not a contractor, I'm not an engineer, I don't know what, but that would give them something to look at, to base their decisions on.
That's it. That's all I have for the new items.
Mr. B, you wanted to, I don't know, did you want to talk about anything?
No, so to Councilmember Fernandez's point, she and I have discussed this also a few days ago. I agree. Mr. Polly and I have talked about streamlining the processes. One of the things that I've mentioned to actually all the department directors is I'm a big fan of using the Lean or Six Sigma process improvement sort of formula. It's something that I want to do with the building division and actually probably all of community development, and not singling them out. I think it's something we could do across the board. And it would entail time. You have to basically shut down the office for about half a day for every single day for a week to map out everything that's going on and identify. And what we found in the past, having done this, is that a process that you think takes, once you map it, you realize it takes 100 steps for this process, and there's all these different turns and twists. But once you clearly identify, you realize you don't have to take 100 steps. Maybe it's 20. And maybe that will help our residents also, so they don't feel like they're being bounced around. So we're looking at that in addition to the items you mentioned about the how-to sheets and changing the website. Our PIO, Ms. Rodriguez, is here too. She's here for a reason, to get that information, so she'll be working on that as well with Mr. Polly.
Good.
Okay, so we have 10 minutes. Anything else?
No.
No.
Anything else?
No.
Nothing?
First of all, I would just like to thank each of you. I know that some of these discussions kind of run long, and I appreciate your patience and your tolerance, but as I mentioned when I opened this morning, we were hoping to get good, constructive feedback, and I thank each and every one of you for providing that to us this morning. I think that staff is, I've been glancing to my right over here on her computer screen because she's been recording all the substantive changes that we need to look at. So I know staff has a clearly defined target that is in focus now that we can walk away and we can start building out those drafts that we talked about. Obviously, ADUs at the top of that list. So I thank you again for that. I thank Mr. Bahia for his support and Ms. Shoshone and the entire staff for their support. I do have one more thing I would like to add. You all know Mrs. Robinson. You've known her for quite some time. She's been a tremendous asset to the Community Development Department. She's already worked in multiple roles in the department, and it is my pleasure and honor to introduce her to you starting Monday as the new Deputy Director of Community Development.
Congratulations.
Well, I, for one, am extremely happy for that. I look forward to your continued success at the city and want to thank you for all you do for the city in addition to your normal duties. You do probably as much extracurricular activity as you do on the clock. So thank you very much, and I'm very happy in that decision. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And I'd also like to thank the council and I'm like many of you, I'm on a lot of different boards and work with other elected officials and transportation and tourism development and all this kind of stuff. And when I talk about how well our council functions, this is what I'm talking about. It's not that we all think the same, we don't. But this conversation, I will tell you, on some of the other boards that I'm on, it would never, we would leave here more confused than we ever, we would get here at 9 o'clock confused. We would leave at noon and be totally confused. And so we get stuff done here, and you're right. It's not where it needs to be sometimes in terms of customer service, but it's getting better. I mean, we're definitely heading in the right direction, and the work that we're doing here today is going to pay dividends for our residents and contractors that do business here and our staff. I mean, it has an impact on everybody to streamline these things so that code has clear guidelines and the code board doesn't wrestle with, and the BOA doesn't have to wrestle with stuff that's ill-defined. And so it's hard work. This is the hardest work of being on the council. It's easy to come Tuesday nights, but this is where the work really happens. And so this is what I'm talking about. And I know there are those that say, oh, they just always agree and they don't, it's better if they fight. And I don't subscribe to that. I'm sorry, I just don't. I'm on lots of boards where all they do is fight, and I just sit there and play on my phone. It's just nothing gets done.
To your point on that, we all have the opportunity prior to meetings to meet with Mr. Bahia and go over it, but we can't sit here and I can't hear what Ms. Fernandez says or your thoughts or Mr. Chambers, and you can't hear my thoughts because we can't talk about it. And I want to avoid what happened with the fence issue in council, because again, we still can't have the same type of give and take, because we're dealing with an ordinance that's already been flushed out. You guys have already done a lot of hard work on it, and I have no problem if we have more of these type of work sessions. I don't want to have it every week. I don't want to have them all the time, but this is a big issue. This whole series of issues that, we could flush out. Okay, fine, I can live with that. Whereas it's, we get to talk about it and educate ourselves and move forward as a group. And then you guys can take back what we're coming up with and get a better feel for it. So I hope to have at least one or two more work sessions with all these other issues before, they come to, except for the ADUs, because we need to, time is of the essence on that one.
Okay, well, we'll have to go to Public Works. I have a chili cook-off trophy to win, so I will see you over there. And we will.
Win? Really?
Yeah, we will stand adjourned.